instead of having to wait till the very end of the meeting. So with that change, can we have approval of the agenda? Moved and seconded, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. We have next adoption of minutes of the regular council meeting of June the 12th. Moved and second, is there a seconder? Thank you. Are there any amendments, corrections, or changes required for those minutes? I don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed, that carries. We have receipt of committee and commission minutes. We can do both Board of Variance and Heritage Commission together. Can I have a mover and a second to receipt?
Just a point on the Heritage Commission minutes.
Okay, if we haven't moved and seconded, Bill, just we can move them separately then if we want to make a variation, a change. So we'll move. We don't need to change their minutes, but we'll deal with 4.1 first. So we can just move receipt of Board of Variance minutes. Moved and seconded. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. You wish to add something?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. And just in reading the minutes and the discussion that went on about getting the list of homes that or dwellings that are or buildings that are on the either registered or designated, I just wanted to point out that the Oak Bay Heritage Foundation receives grant funding. And they're funded by the district. So the Heritage Foundation is the arm's length body that provides cost-sharing grants to owners of designated or registered buildings. And so, in my mind, that is the body that must have the up-to-date list of registered and designated properties, because they're actually awarding grants if the applications come in. So I just point that out as a clarification, because it makes it seem like the commission is the body that does govern it all, but the Heritage Foundation has always been the body that actually tracked and kept the records of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had moved them separately, so we have a Board of Variance minutes first, but we'll just say that comment on the principle. So first up, 4.1 Board of Variance minutes is just receipt. We don't approve, we just receive. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. And then the Heritage Commission minutes for receipt, moved and seconded. Any other discussion on the Heritage Commission? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you very much. My remarks tonight, I have a few things to cover, but I'll try and do it fairly briefly. I had the honor of attending the Oak Bay High grad class on Thursday, June 22nd. So I just want to say congratulations to all the graduating class. I think it's about 300 kids, so a pretty substantial group going across that stage. I also had the pleasure of attending the Regional Housing Affordability session hosted by the Victoria Foundation. It was a very interesting session held by both funders, policymakers, some levels of government, and then service providers within the field of affordability, looking at possible ways of building connections and efficiencies within our systems that can help support affordability in the region. There was also today a carbon budgeting or climate budgeting session. This is a fairly new idea of attaching carbon costs or climate costs to our budgeting process. It's been trialed in a number of larger cities around the world and is sort of being considered in smaller and smaller jurisdictions. And so it was an education session both for elected officials as well as staff. I just wanted to thank Councillor Smart, who attended. She's the appointee from to the CRD's Climate Committee. But also Mr. Bowl, who's Director of Community Building and Planning, also attended as a representative from a staff perspective. So we had good representation there, and it was well attended and very interesting discussion. I want to remind people in Oak Bay that taxes are due on July 4th. That's a Tuesday after this long weekend, and the annual questionnaire, which you've traditionally done in the fall, but are doing now as sort of in alignment with our budget, since people are more interested in what we're spending money on when we're doing budget process, is also closing on July the 4th. So we have about 700 responses to that so far, which is much better than we usually get, but we would love to have more. So if there's anybody out there that's interested, please fill that in. There's also a number of other events going on that people should be aware of. The Uplands Humber Catchment Sewage Separation open houses are happening this week. That's this Tuesday, tomorrow, from 6 to 8 p.m. and Thursday from 1 to 3 p.m. Both of those are at Windsor Park. We have the Oak Bay Arts Alive opening event, which is happening on July 6th. We have the joint Oak Bay, we also, I didn't put it in my notes, but this Thursday is also the initial Music in the Park happening at Willows Park. So that's at 6 p.m. For people who are interested in going seeing live music in the park. We also, for people interested, we're going to be hosting a joint Oak Bay Police Board and Council meeting on July 10th at 5 p.m. That's really to review the new strategic plan from the Oak Bay Police Board. And there is an open house this Friday at 2 p.m. for the Jack Wallace Jack Wallace track. This is going to provide information. Currently, Oak Bay Alumni Association is undertaking a very substantive fundraising project and with partnership, and looking at some pretty substantial changes potentially to make that whole space much more usable, both for the school but also for events and for the public to use. So I encourage people who are interested to attend that open house as well. As I noted, is being organized by the Oak Bay High Alumni Association. I thought I'd just take a moment here as well to recognize Mr. John Falkins, who is an Oak Bay High grad himself and who passed away unexpectedly quite recently. And he's far from the public eye, but Mr. Falkins, very instrumental in making our community a better place. He established that Oak Bay High Alumni Association and then served as its president for 15 years before handing over the reins. Very involved and instrumental in many permanent improvements to the school that he loved. He went to and loved it. He helped establish a number of scholarships and raise funds to buy the Steinway piano that goes in the performance hall, and many other things. So I just thought I'd acknowledge, just because our community is always a better place for people like Mr. Falkins, who just work diligently in the background, making the community a better place. So I just want to express the community's appreciation for all that he did in his lifetime. With that, we move on to the public participation period, our alliterative portion of the meeting. We welcome members of the public to come forward and address council on matters. It's typically matters that are not on the agenda, but are matters of interest to Oak Bay. If you're online on the Zoom call, you can raise your hand through the Zoom app, or if you've called in, you can hit *9 to raise your hand. But I'll make the invitation here, and you'll note in the agenda if there's items that are available for public input, then I will call people at that time to speak. But at this point, this is for things that are typically not on the agenda, not land use related. So is there anybody from the audience who is here to address council? And I'll check online. I'm having a look here, Mr. Dowling. I don't see anybody online that seems to be indicating that they would like to speak. Okay, so with that, we will move on to the balance of the agenda. As I noted at the beginning, we just amended the agenda to move item number 11.1 up here behind the public comment and question period. So we will deal with that item now. And I understand, Councillor Smart, you wish to recuse yourself. You just briefly state the reason for your recusal, and then we'll let you leave the room before we start.
Thank you. I wish to recuse myself from this item due to a business relationship with the architect on the project.
Thank you very much. Maybe just go into the committee room and we'll come grab you as soon as we're done the agenda item. Thank you. So with that, for everybody following along, this is 11.1 development variance permit for 55 King George Terrace. Mr. Bowl, are you presenting it here on behalf of Mr. Muller? Thank you. Why don't you provide the overview? And we have the applicants here as well to answer any questions if they, or provide a presentation if they see fit. But go ahead, Mr. Bowl.
Thank you, Your Worship. A short introduction while Mr. Muller is away today. Today we're looking at starting the notice process for a variance for 55 King George Terrace. This is for a proposed new single-family home, and the site conditions are such that the existing home from 1974 is already built to similar setback variances that might have been approved in the past, but for the new home, because there's a steep drop-off fairly soon after if you go from the roadside into the property, there's not a whole lot of space to work with without getting into all kinds of engineered solutions on the cliffside. So therefore, for the new home, this variance seeks to obtain a front yard setback and a variance for the maximum surface area that can be paved in front. And the two are kind of interlinked. So really the location of the house is leading. So the proposed new house is set back a bit further from the road than the existing house, but still needs a variance of about 6.43 meters. and ends up at a front setback of about 1.919 meters, or about just under 4 feet. Now, related to that, because the house does move back, the existing driveway is already over the amount that we allow in front yards, but of course with the building setting back, that is an increase in the coverage needed practically to get to the garage. And that variance from an allowed 25% is proposed or requested to be approved for 35.7%. And so those two variances go hand in hand with responding to the site constraints. I should mention, maybe as a part of other information, there's a bit of information in the report on trees. There are two trees identified at the back of the property to be removed, but they would be replaced with 4 new trees. Other than that, today's consideration by council is to start a notification process based on that direction. Staff would make sure notification takes place to the neighbors within 50 meters. And then this item would come back to you at a subsequent meeting for the actual decision on the variance itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members of council to the applicants or to staff? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks very much, and through you, Mayor, to I guess to Mr. Bowl. How does this normally when we have a brand new property that's going in, we don't make concession to have an addition of paved surface, et cetera, but this is a very different piece of land. So, but I'm just wondering, how does it compare, the paved surface compared to other properties around? I tried to drive by and have a look, but I couldn't really tell. Is this would this be really in keeping with what the other properties have as well?
Mr. Bull?
I'm going a little bit by memory because I have visited that area, but I think there are definitely other situations in that neighborhood that respond to the steep terrain and try to find workable solutions on the site. So it's also a bit of a numbers representation. It sounds like a bigger increase, but the catch is that the house and the driveway are all the way at the top. So there's a relatively large backyard that will stay green and not built on, or should. It is, of course, a very steep area, but that's, I think, a realistic reality in that area.
If I could just ask one more. And then actually, speaking of the backyard, I did notice, is it decking in the backyard? Because it looks like there's a small pool or a hot tub or built in or something in the backyard. And I was wondering if that is in a paved area as well, or whether that's more of a decking or something like that.
Well, maybe the owners can confirm, but I believe that's a deck that is part of the house. Looking at the back there.
If you don't mind, if you just have to come forward and join us at the, so we have it on the record, yeah, if you just sit down at the desk here, if you just hit the button on the microphone and just state your name and the municipality of residence, and then you can
Chris
answer the
Floyd from Oak Bay.
answer the question.
With regard to the hot tub or deck area with a spa in the backyard, that's outside of the 7.62 meter rear yard setback. There's no plan to have any paving inside of the 25-foot or 7.62 meter rear yard setback.
Thank you. Thanks. Are there any other questions for the applicant or for staff? Don't see any.
I'll move receipt.
Move receipt of the report. Go ahead. Moved and seconded. Don't usually debate receipt of the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'll move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. For those watching and wondering, the process here, as Mr. Bull noted, variances like this go through a two-step process. They come here for council to have a review and make sure that if there's any changes that council sees as wanting to see before they go out to public notice, this is our chance to send that back and have that question. If it appears to meet the needs, be reasonable, then it goes out, if this motion passes, for notification to neighbors. There's a notification radius that goes out to the immediate neighbors and informs them of this ask, and then it comes back here. At that point, we also take public input. So we would expect any pieces of correspondence attached to that notification, as well as the opportunity for public to address us at that time, and that's where the decision is made on the variance. Not seeing any. It's usually a good sign when we don't have a lot of questions or a lot of demand for things. So I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Notice will be given. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for being amenable to switching around as well. That worked well, so thank you. We move on to reports and memorandums. These are all items that came from Committee of the Whole, and welcome back, Councillor Smart. So I'm going to ask for public input on all of them up front, just because we did have public input on them all at the Committee of the Whole, and so if people wish to address us. So this is 8.1 draft surplus allocation policy, 8.2 blasting regulation changes, 8.3 land use procedure bylaw renewal, and 8.4 the infill housing program project sign off. If anybody wishes to address council, we did receive some correspondence on at least one of the items there. So certainly there may be some interest from the public to address council, and we certainly welcome that. So what I'm going to ask is that if anybody wishes to address council on any of these four, that you can do so at this time. Okay. I just see people who wrote letters on the land use procedure bylaw renewal. Okay, just making sure there's no public input before I go to these pieces. I'm going to deal with them independently, but I will move forward through them one by one. So draft surplus allocation policy. The recommendation is here from Committee of the Whole. Can I have someone move that recommendation?
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. I just want to point out this is a slight change in that we asked for wording that would include some indexing of the fund values. So that wording has been included in this version of it. So just to make sure everybody's clear, this is the only one that has changed slightly out of the Committee of the Whole. So the motion is to approve it with that indexing wording language in there, indexing to the forced growth that we include in our financial plan. Don't see any discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Moving on to 8.2 blasting regulation changes. Oh, opposed. Sorry, one opposed. We move on to 8.2 blasting regulation changes. We move in a seconder of the
I'll move the recommendations.
moved, and is there a seconder? Committee of the Whole seconder? It's passed unanimously at Committee of the Whole. Okay, there we go. We're struggling with some technology here, so sometimes this is pieces. Is there any discussion on those recommendations? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and I don't recall pointing this out in our last discussion. I apologize for that. It just says in the recommendation towards the end, and that the drafting process include one public meeting and a gathering of input from the building industry and affected contractors. I'm just wondering if the one public meeting is implying sort of constriction or restriction, and should we just say that it will include a public meeting and also input from the public as well. I'm just wondering if the one public meeting will be enough, or imply that it's enough consultation. So I would rather not say one. I would, anyway. I think you get my drift.
I do.
Thanks.
I'm just going to remind the body. So there were sort of three options, and we could have tweaked it. But out of the Committee of the Whole, there was one option to do a more fulsome kind of community engagement process. But it was felt, at least at that meeting, that this is sort of the consultation light, move it forward more quickly, and make sure that we at least had one public meeting that allowed for that input. So if there's changes to this that people wish to make, it's probably the right time now to make any amendments to that recommendation, so that we're a bit more clear on that. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, my recollection is the same as yours, Mayor, and I think that one of the reasons that we did that was for expediency and also for cost as well. That we were thinking that we could move it we could move it forward faster by having the one meeting. So I would prefer to stay with the one meeting.
And just my response, I don't disagree. What I would just add for notes for staff is that one public meeting be a robust meeting and well advertised ahead of time, so that people have lots of heads up so they can attend and be a part of it, and that it be planned at a time when hopefully people are around. Thank you.
I will point out two things. I think we have a pretty good culture here. If things are raised at that meeting that we don't have answers to, and it might change the scope, that would typically come back here for us to consider. And second, when these bylaw changes come back to council, there's also the opportunity for public input on those changes at that time. So the recommendations will come back here for public input and our input.
I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other discussion on this one? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? I don't think I mentioned it, but I should have. I am watching my screen carefully here because Councillor Appleton is traveling for business and is unable to be here with us tonight, but he is attending via Zoom, and so he's very adept at unmuting and raising his hand on the screen, but if you see me glancing over here, it's primarily to make sure I'm not missing him if he has any interest in commenting on any of the items before us. Item number, and thank you very much, Councillor Appleton, for joining us. It's not always easy in the midst of a lot of work and travel to still come in remotely and participate. So Councillor Braithwaite set a very high bar when she was traveling across Spain to come in from her travels. 8.3, Land Use Procedure Bylaw Renewal. We have a series of recommendations here from Committee of the Whole, but we did have a bit of public correspondence on this as well. So I just, perhaps I'll take the motion for this as is, and then we can have a conversation if there's any.
I'll move the recommendation.
Move the recommendations. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. I want to just point out, because we had a few pieces of correspondence raising legitimate concerns about the heritage alteration permit delegation potential, and that conversation was also had at the Committee of the Whole. And so what's being asked for here is to ask staff to come back with, are there mechanisms by which minor heritage alteration permits, as well as development permits and upland setting and design, if there a way of clearly defining what makes up minor and delegating those. And part of that rationale was that part of heritage often gets a bad rap when things take a long time to get approval for minor changes that are clearly within context. And so this is just looking at ways that we might be able to sort of take some of those away from going through the whole writing of reports and coming to council process when they're very obviously supported by heritage practices and so forth. It may or may not be possible, but I just want to make sure people understand this is not approving that process. It's asking staff to come back and include that as one of several options that we might be able to delegate to staff to make sure that those processes are efficient if they're minor. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And you did reference the public input and letters. I think one of the writers made a good point, though, that these should be referred to the Heritage Commission before we adopt them, I think, in terms of the HAP, just so that I think it makes sense to have the input from our commission members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I would agree. I think that when these options come back to us, it would make sense to recommend that they get referred. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I think also there was one sentence in here. It says, in Schedule B, there's no acknowledgement of a heritage conservation area in existence in Oak Bay. Is that, I mean, I looked and I didn't see any. Is that something that should be changed, or is that?
Go ahead, Mr. Bowl.
For you, Mayor, it is arranged for differently. You wouldn't, the HCA is on its own in the official community plan. It's a piece of regulation. And the land use procedure bylaw, the new proposed development application procedures bylaw, doesn't need to reference it. It will trigger one of these approvals that are listed in the bylaw. That's how that works. So that's the reason why it's not specifically referenced further.
Thank you. All right. See no other hands? I already called for public input for all of them at the beginning. Anybody else wish to address council on this matter? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. And then we have infill housing program project sign off. Just going to move in a second.
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on the project sign off piece? Not seeing any. This makes it official once we vote on it here. All those in favor? Any? Oh, please go. Sorry, my apologies. I was called at the very beginning. I think you guys were probably just coming in at that point. So please come forward. Process for public input is just if you could just state your name and municipality of residence and then address council on the matter in front of us.
Do I press the button?
You do. Just push it and it'll turn on. There we go. Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Margaret Bateman, and I'm here tonight representing the Uplands Neighborhood Association. And we'd like to just speak briefly to this recommendation. So we understand that the consultant who will be chosen to perform the next steps in the infill housing program will be using the guiding principles and the key direction that this council has approved and supported as a foundation for their recommendations that will come back to this council. So we want to reiterate that given these three primary guiding principles, provide diverse housing options, support ease of implementation, and cherish what the community loves, that the principle of cherishing what the community loves received the greatest support throughout the Oak Bay community and beyond, quite frankly. So when moving through the next stages, this commitment, we believe, should be paramount. And the residents of Uplands, like the majority of residents across our Oak Bay neighborhoods, value the unique characteristics of their neighborhoods. And to our residents, this especially means protecting the extensive and mature tree canopy that provides vital environmental, and I would say even other irreplaceable benefits to the whole community. So we are therefore requesting that when considering infill housing in the Uplands neighborhood, you respect what the community cherishes there. And as you move forward in this process, this precious tree canopy is really respectfully protected. We also believe that the current Uplands bylaws that regard setbacks, lot coverage, and off-street parking requirements should be maintained as well to preserve and protect the community's character. And we ask that your housing strategy report that acknowledged Uplands as a National Historic Site and its recommendation around lot subdivisions also be respected and upheld. We believe that changes to the Oak Bay bylaws can both meet the municipality's housing goals and protect the unique aspects of all the legacy neighborhoods in Oak Bay. And we believe that the uniqueness and priorities of all neighborhoods can be preserved, and that the priorities of the majority of Oak Bay citizens and taxpayers can be respected as our neighborhoods inevitably grow and change. And we believe, and we would regret, and I'm sure we all would, what could be destroyed if we don't strive to protect the community values the most. So maybe one, I think, important fact in closing, that our neighborhood association fully supports any concerns the Oak Bay Council has with the proposed provincial legislation and what it may do to the ability of communities to make local decisions that reflect local voices and the characters of individual communities. We have concerns that the legislation may not fully recognize market realities or the complexities that municipalities face in meeting both the housing targets while sustaining community character and values. And perhaps even the legislation may appear blinded to some unintended consequences. We believe that realism and respect for local priorities form the bedrock of good governance and sound local decision-making that reflects local community and character. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there another speaker? That's it? Okay. I'll give a last chance for anybody else who wishes to address council on this matter. Can do so. Don't see any. Have it moved and seconded, I believe, at this point. So no further discussion. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Very effective hand raising there to catch my attention before I called the question. I appreciate you having the. Thank you so much for coming out tonight and joining us and speaking with us. We move to number 9, which is reports and memorandums. This is, I think, the only item on the agenda remaining that doesn't have public input. It's just a very lengthy and somewhat scary report on the status of the marina and surrounding buildings. Ms. Bay, welcome, and please give us an introduction.
Thank you, Your Worship. On March 27th, Council directed staff to proceed with obtaining a number of condition reports, building envelope, seismic, support structures, and environmental performance assessments for the marina buildings. Following a request for quotes process, Herald Engineering Limited was commissioned to complete the studies. Herald Engineering has completed their inspections and assessments, and Roxanne Dewey-Gu, a structural engineer, and Craig Appleman, materials engineer, are here tonight to present their findings and answer any questions council may have. There's a lot to consider. Staff's recommendation at this point is simply to receive the report. Urgent life safety repairs that are referenced in the report have been completed. What to do with other repairs can be addressed in the context of related decisions council will face in the near future. So referencing what those decisions might be, the information in the report may be useful when council's faced with deciding what to do with the restaurant, which is currently vacant, how to prioritize facility maintenance and upgrades within the context of the district's 5-year lease with Oak Bay Marine Group, and finally, how to proceed with the site longer term beyond 2027. So those are decisions that are in front of council that I know there'll be discussion on likely later on in the year, and it's among council's priorities to address some of those and to have discussion with the community and with First Nations regarding those component pieces. But this is important background information for council and the community have when we enter into some of those discussions. So with that, Your Worship, I'd just like to reiterate that the engineers are here tonight and are available to provide a quick summary of their findings and answer any questions council may have.
Sure. Why don't you come forward? And I'm sorry, I didn't catch the names when you were.
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe while staff are loading up the presentation that the engineers have provided us with, I'll just reintroduce them. We have Roxanne Duigu, structural engineer, and Craig Appleman, materials engineer, both from Herald Engineering.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Ms. Duigu.
Hi, thank you.
Your Worship, we seem to have some technical issues. I will just re-email that presentation for our staff to load up onto our screens here. Just give me a minute.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
As this is being loaded up, I might just comment as well. We managing the meeting today, we're on schedule according to my timelines. This report is for information. It might lead to some other ask of next steps. But obviously our job as a governance body is not to get too far into the weeds on the engineering details, but obviously there's some substantial findings in this report that are worth going over. I really appreciate the engineer. Thank you both for being here tonight to provide an overview and be available to questions, because these facts will obviously inform future decision making on our behalf. So,
Absolutely. Thank you. Ready? Almost. Okay.
why don't you do it just sort of verbally as an introduction, and we'll bring it up on screen here in a second. Oh, it's not attached. It says Ms. Bay.
It really makes more sense with the slides, if it'll be
Okay.
just a
Nope.
moment.
Well, we'll bring them up then.
I do believe I have it on a USB. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Appleton, we're just struggling to get the presentation up on the screen, so we'll just bring it up here in a second. And so you'll be able to see it as well as the, perfect, thank you. All right.
I'm giving a cue to change slides. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you. As stated, I am Roxanne Duigu from Herald Engineering. My colleague Craig Appleman is here behind me. And we'll be summarizing our recent condition assessment report on the Oak Bay Marina. Next slide, please. First, we'll cover the scope of our assessment, then provide a summary of our findings, including some safety concerns that are being addressed. Next slide, please. Next, we'll cover the anticipated costs of rehabilitation and provide some detail on our overall recommendations. And next slide. Our assessment focused on the 3 buildings and the concrete support structure. Next slide. The reviewed systems include the building enclosure, the lateral system for seismic forces, the concrete slab, the deck and breezeway, as well as the mechanical and electrical systems. Next slide. We'll begin with the building enclosure, which means the system that separates the interior from the exterior, including walls, doors, windows, and roofs. Next slide. It was observed that most of the enclosure for all 3 buildings requires remedial work. Next slide, please. The doors and windows do not conform to current standards. It is also noted that the thermal performance is very poor throughout due to a lack of insulation and air tightness. Next slide. Next is the lateral system, which resists seismic and wind forces. The types of systems were identified as glulam moment frames in the restaurant and masonry shear walls in the other 2 buildings. Next slide, please. The systems have been resisting wind load to date. However, the wind load is likely 10 to 20% of the current seismic load in the code. Major inconsistencies were noted in the load path. Seismic retrofit work is recommended for all buildings to increase the capacity and to properly drag the seismic load through the structure and down to bedrock. Next slide, please. The concrete support structure is a suspended slab over the foreshore. The structure is continuously exposed to salt water, which is considered a corrosive environment for concrete. Next slide, please. Many areas exhibit concrete deterioration and corrosion of the reinforcing. An extensive repair campaign is required to address the damaged areas and exposed reinforcing. A further protection system of galvanic anodes is also recommended to extend the life of the repair work. Next slide, please. Other exterior areas that were assessed include the lower level deck and the steel columns in the breezeway. The timber deck is cantilevered off of the concrete slab with structural steel supports, and the breezeway columns are supporting a wood floor above. Next slide. Both the deck supports and the columns have been identified as safety concerns due to corroded structural steel. These issues were addressed immediately, as we'll see in a few slides. Next slide, please. The mechanical system is a combination of original and upgraded equipment, including gas boilers and a gas furnace. The condition of the individual components was reviewed, as well as the overall performance. Next slide, please. It is recommended that the mechanical system be replaced in the near future. Most individual components have exceeded their expected service life, and a comprehensive replacement is recommended, as several code compliance issues will need to be addressed if any work is done to the system. Next slide, please. Similar to the mechanical system, the components of the electrical system were reviewed individually, as well as the overall performance. Next slide, please. It is recommended that the electrical system first be maintained and then eventually replaced. Many electrical components have exceeded their expected service life. These components may continue to serve their function for several more years. However, they are at increasing risk of failure, which may require costly emergency repairs. Next slide, please. As noted earlier, some safety concerns were identified during the assessment. Here we see that access to the cantilevered portion of the lower level deck has now been restricted due to the condition of the supports below. Next slide, please. Similarly, there is now temporary shoring installed at the exterior breezeway columns to safely carry the load from the floor above. Next slide. Next slide. The current condition of the property means that extensive remedial work is necessary. A rehabilitation plan would include replacement of the enclosure, mechanical, and electrical systems. The concrete needs extensive repair work to extend its service life, and the lateral system requires full-scale retrofit work. The rehabilitation work would presumably be organized into programs or areas and sequenced accordingly. Next slide, please. The rehabilitation plan has been evaluated for probable costs, and the total comes out to just over $12 million for hard construction costs. There is an additional $1 million in hard costs for work that would increase performance. Next slide, please. This 12 million total is a rough cost projection intended to help with ranking and decision making. As mentioned, this is for hard construction costs only and does not include soft costs like permitting, consulting, insurance, tenant improvements. The list goes on. Next slide, please. This assessment has shown that comprehensive remedial work is required. Given the district's interest in matters such as energy efficiency, it may be beneficial to evaluate new construction options along with rehabilitation options, as the capital costs of rehabilitation may not be more economical than new construction when evaluating the final product. Next slide, please. This report has provided a summary of the condition of the reviewed systems and recommendations for remedial work. Going forward in the decision-making process, it is recommended that other industry professionals such as architects, estimators, and contractors are consulted to provide further detail on the various options being considered. Next slide. And I will now open the floor to any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dewey-Gui. Is Mr. Appleman providing a presentation as well, or just here to answer questions?
I'm just here for questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I see a number of hands popping up, so we'll start over here and go around. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I think. I guess my question at the moment, and I really appreciate the honest assessment of the condition of these buildings and the systems that guide them, but I know at the moment there are telescoping supports that have been placed, I think outside the cafe up to the balcony, I think is, am I correct? I hope I am. What, in your opinion, and you may not be able to answer this, but what are the risks or liabilities we should be concerned about when we have to add additional support to the building? Is there anything that we should be aware of beyond what you have currently reported? I know it's hard to determine, but I do understand the dynamic between concrete and salt water. It's not a good one, so.
That's true, yes.
Okay, well, thank you. If you care to comment, if not, I will totally understand.
Well, the situation with the columns in the breezeway, those were noted that the wall thickness on the steel columns in some places had deteriorated, that there were holes in it. So that's the reason for those additional shore posts in the breezeway. And so that was noted during the initial assessment. And so before the report came out, we were in contact with Oak Bay staff to make sure that that was addressed separately. When it comes to other items that are at the top of that list, there are two other items that are in the report that the staff is also aware of and is working on. One of them is the connection of the gangway, the hinge where the gangway that leads down to the docks, the hinge where it connects to the concrete slab is also deteriorated. And so we have recommended in the report that that connection be monitored and that every 6 months it be inspected by a materials engineer to determine its suitability for continued use. So that was one where it's in an acceptable condition that we didn't take immediate action like we did with the lower level deck and with the shore post, but that it is nearing the end of its service life and will need to be monitored. So that's one that the staff are aware of and that they're working on, as far as I'm aware. And what is the other one? Oh yeah, in the breezeway, so near where those shore posts are, there's an area that the building enclosure consultant noted might be active ingress of water into that floor system there. And so that needs further investigation, probably taking off some finishings to investigate what's happening there. And the safety concern with that one is if there's any concealed damage, that we want to make sure that we're approaching that appropriately. Lucky it's not January, it's June, so it has been quite dry out. So they'll have an opportunity to open that up, and we'll take next steps as required.
I really appreciate that. I know that for all of us, public health and safety are at the very top of our list, and so thank you very much for your assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite, did I see your hand? Councillor Smart, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. My questions might be directed to both consultant and staff, but I guess in looking at section 8.1 and the immediate action due to safety concerns that we've just been discussing, I guess I wasn't 100% clear on sort of, in a sense, what the budget is for that. I referred to a few different sections of the report, but it wasn't clear to me, I guess, what funds we've spent to date, what funds we will need to spend to take care of these immediate actions that have potential safety concerns, and how that fits into our budget.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. I may go to Mr. Graham on some of these because you're probably more invested in terms of our own budget and what work is being done. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, through your worship. I followed my standard procedures of life safety first, which is the shoring and the barricades. It cost roughly about $9,000 to date. I decided to purchase the shoring rather than renting it, being it will likely be up for a while. It'll actually save the district some money. The next phase, as was mentioned, is asset protection, and we'll be opening up the soffits and doing some inspections. That's going to proceed the next couple of weeks, and right now the estimates for that are just for the visual inspections are only going to be a few $1,000s to open it up and see what's in there. Once we determine that, it may be more if we have to make emergency repairs, but we won't know that until we're actually in that space.
Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Just one additional question with regards to the what appears to be a reduction in patio floor space for the cafe. Do we need to do anything to ensure that there's proper exiting and yet ability for them to sort of maintain the value of what they had before? Do we need to do anything to facilitate them having extra space potentially in the parking lot?
Mr. Graham?
Through your worship, we've very carefully measured, and we still have fire exit widths on all the decks. We are restricting them to having the patio set up the way it is. Sometimes people tend to group tables and chairs together, so we're keeping them as the tables are set up, and it's working well. It's not restricting it any more than the deck used to be before the cantilevers were added, so it's still meeting fire code exit widths.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the report. Never easy to hear some of this information, but necessary to hear it. So without making any presumptions about replacement or retrofit specifically, but in your informed opinion, if a retrofit was considered, would that require could the building still be occupied partially, or would it essentially require that the buildings be vacated to carry out the work?
I'll give you a typical engineering answer, which is it depends. We always like that one. Honestly, it does depend. The extent of the work that's required would mean that any building that's being worked on would not be able to be occupied at that time. However, there are opportunities for a phased approach or different types of work being organized in different ways, which I think the Oak Bay staff would have a better handle on how to manage those specific items. But it is possible that parts of the property could potentially be used while construction is going on in other areas. Excuse me, although that would be yet to be decided.
Patterson?
Thank you. And just another question, maybe for staff. Considering that there are landlord's obligations under the existing lease, have staff, either with the assistance of the consultants or independently, explored what would be necessary to be maintained, not for the full building, say the restaurant building as it exists today, but in a reduced mode so that it could still provide the facilities and services for the way it is being used today, just to the end of the lease term.
Mr. Graham?
Sorry, through your worship, could you clarify that? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess with your, through you, Mayor, I guess what I'm thinking of is, say, something like the electrical distribution system. It was initially installed to service all areas, including the marina portion. Now, the marina, of course, is operated independently of the district, but it still gets its services from that distribution. So, could the distribution be downsized or modified in a way simply at a lesser cost to maintain the businesses that are there at this point in time without doing a full retrofit on all of the systems?
Thank you. And this is presuming that there's a failure of the systems, which has not happened yet. Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Through your worship, depends on the system we're working on, to be quite honest. For instance, the boiler system, the restaurants, and below that, the coffee shop, it was designed as one building. The boiler serves both. For instance, this spring, when the restaurant became vacant, I shut down the heat to the upper floor because there was no need for us to waste energy doing that. Unfortunately, that shut off some of the heat and hot water to the lower floor as well, so we had to make some changes to some valves. So depending on the systems, partially electrical, we could certainly do. So obviously more efficient to retrofit a space that's already empty like the restaurant currently is. But there are some building systems that manage the whole building, and we wouldn't be able to do those independently.
Thank you. There's a hand raised from a Western Design Build, but is that a member of this team, or is it just a? So this is not a place for public input, so the hand raised right now is not, we're not taking public input on this matter. We're just really receiving this for information at this meeting, not having public input. But I think that's probably, I don't have any questions, but I'll make a comment here that thank you to the engineering team for bringing this. It's always better to have good news than bad, but it's important for us to have all the information. And very important, I think, in this case, also to have this in the public realm. Important for us to receive it here in this meeting, just so that everybody understands the conditions that will affect, obviously, our considerations of both the short and the long-term use of that building, and many other factors. So important work to be done. Very glad it is done. I don't know if there's any other questions before I go to a motion to receive the report. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And it's not a question, but I just wondered if I could make a suggestion on the report that Ms. Babe prepared so well, and under council priorities supported. I wondered if we could add truth and reconciliation, only because there is a reference directly to the nations at the end of one of the last paragraphs. So I wondered if we could make the second priority truth and reconciliation as part of addressing the marina issue. Just a suggestion.
It's a report that we would normally, it is what it is. I think I appreciate the comment being made, and perhaps we can just look at reports as they come forward with that. I would always caution that if it's not actively addressing specifically that reconciliation process, everything kind of touches on it, that we might end up sort of almost trivializing that term if everything attaches to it. This affects it indirectly, but certainly the work following from this is going to have a lot of direct impact on our reconciliation process. I'm not sure process-wise if council wished to change the report before we receive it. I'm not sure what that process would look like. Mr. Coates, can I put you on the hot seat? I don't.
Thank you, Your Worship. So certainly it's a report from staff to council, and so I would perhaps suggest that would be at the author's discretion there, because I mean, I don't think council's giving staff direction on what they report. Right?
Fair. Councillor Green, are you satisfied that we just make sure that we're looking at this, all the things related to the marina in that lens, and if it does touch on it in future, we make sure we include that as part of the...
Yes, and this wasn't meant as a criticism. Please
I
know that. It was to add another perspective to where that report was going, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure it'll be of great interest to our First Nations partners going forward as well. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I did have a question for Ms. Duigu, if I could, just before we move forward with anything. And it was just about the extent of the inspection work. So this is clearly, and thank you, a very comprehensive report, and I'm so impressed that it came back within the time frame that it did. It's a huge amount of work. And it's very well illustrated, and I just wanted to understand if there were any things you might not have discovered yet because the extent of your work didn't get there, or when you show us some of the bad news you do, can we be satisfied that that's as bad as it gets, or might there be things that we still don't know? So if you understand my question.
I think we all know the answer to this question. Go ahead.
The assessment was in depth, but there is, of course, always a chance that there are other issues that did not become known throughout this assessment. One thing in particular that I think might help answer that is, for instance, we looked at the lateral system, the seismic force system, but not necessarily the gravity system. That wasn't in the scope of the report. And part of how that works is that there's a part in the building code called Commentary L, which essentially deals with existing structures, and that there is a, what's the best way to phrase this? We don't know of significant changes that have happened to the property recently that would have changed the loading conditions. And besides the few items that we have already discussed here today, we didn't notice on site large area, like we didn't notice evidence of other damage or deterioration. We obviously would have brought that to light if we had. And so there is always a chance that there are elements that are damaged or in poor condition that weren't part of this assessment. However, those two things working together, an existing structure that isn't blatantly showing other evidence of damage and the loading conditions haven't been changed, and the extent of the assessment that we've just completed. That doesn't mean that there aren't other things that could be damaged, but there wasn't anything that came to light through this recent assessment that we haven't already brought to the District of Oak Bay's attention.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart, then Councillor Patterson. Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor, just one question related to that, and I just wanted to confirm that a thorough hazmat analysis has not been done on this building, even though it is of an era where many of the components, coatings, and paints may contain asbestos, which could lead to significant costs. So just confirming that that hasn't been done in this report.
Not in the scope of this report, no.
And Mr. Graham, is that assessment been done on our part to go through and measure for materials?
To my knowledge, no, we have no formal report on that. We're assuming everything is asbestos and lead-based paint. Whenever we do any repair work, we treat it that way, but we have not gone through and done a full assessment.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just to follow up on the gangway connection that was also showing significant deterioration. Could we have confirmation of where that responsibility lies, if that is with the marina operator or if that is with the district as the landlord? I'm not quite certain. It's kind of a gray area of where you would connect into the structure and
Ms. Bay, has that been determined?
Thank you, Your Worship. It is something that we'll be looking into. It is a gray area, and I think arguments could be made that without the dock structure there, the gangway wouldn't be required. So that's something that we're going to have to further evaluate and discuss.
Thank you. In the interest of both parties to make sure it's safe, obviously. Can I have one last question on the seismic piece? In terms of the work and the costing there required to kind of bring it up, is that, just curious, where are those seismic standards? They're shifting all the time. Is that current seismic standards, or is it essentially, like, where does that, given it's an old building, those seismic requirements change?
Well, the way that we looked at it is under the 2018 BC Building Code. And that is, that's the code that is in effect right now. The code is also changing relatively soon. It's expected to be towards the end of 2023 that the new BC Building Code will be coming out, and that will have higher, is expected to have higher seismic hazard index. With that said, though, what we noted in this particular structure is that there were significant load path issues. And so the capacity of the individual elements on their own almost becomes secondary if they're not properly connected together. And so it has been performing under wind load. The seismic load is expected to be much, much higher. But what we found with this property was a load path issue above anything else. And so the numerical load at the end of the day definitely matters, but in what the retrofit work for this particular property would focus on would be properly connecting all of those individual elements together. That's really the piece that's missing here.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, we have a
Move
recommended.
receipt.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Moved it. Yes, for receipt, yes. Oh, please, yeah, you have to come forward and speak into the microphone or else people online can't hear you. If you could just state your name, oh, I can introduce you. You're Mr. Appleman, for materials engineer. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing to your question about, is there something we haven't seen? The first one is we have pointed out a few points for that require more investigation. For example, behind there's a retaining wall there that we suspect there's been some washing out of fines. And so we didn't do any excavation. We didn't try to just, chase that all the way back. So that's a bit of a risk. And then the other one is every time you work with a concrete structure like this, which is deteriorating, you never really know the full extent. And so we see a lot of damage and we see a lot of corroded rebar. But once you start chipping that rebar, that concrete off to repair it, that's when you really understand what's going on. So, we can see a lot and we have good ways of testing the concrete and testing the rebar to see what its current condition is, but there's always an unknown. And when we do rehabilitation projects like this, we always try to build in a contingency to address that, but even sometimes we go over that as well. So I just wanted to add that point. Thank you.
Very much appreciated. So first up, we have motion to receive live on the table. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
I'd like to make a motion arising to direct staff to prepare a statement of significance on the heritage of the building to inform the decision-making process going forward.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Usually want a seconder for motivation before. Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
This is a significant heritage building that is very notable in its era, and it has been brought up by the Heritage Commission that they've requested that a statement of significance be drawn, and I think it's respectful and due diligence for us to make decisions going forward in a balanced way based on these costs and respect the value that this building has to the community. That's my motivation.
Thank you. So the motion is to direct staff to prepare a statement of significance, a heritage statement of significance to inform future decision making. Heritage statements of significance. That's probably all it needs, actually. I don't think we need the balance to inform decision making. That's the rationale for it. But
And do we need to add for the 3 marina buildings?
yes. If I may, with wording, it'd be probably, yeah. Okay. So the staff be directed to prepare a statement of significance. I'd say, again, a heritage statement of significance for the 3 marina buildings. Thank you. I moved and seconded. Go ahead, Council. You've already motivated. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thanks very much. And I have been aware that the Heritage Commission has wanted this to happen. And I'm not opposed in principle, but here's my concern. I'll play devil's advocate. If in fact the building requires major renovation, or in fact parts of it require demolition, where does that put us in terms of the status of the building and heritage designation? Because it's always such a contentious issue in the community at large with other heritage sites and heritage houses when they're under threat of demolition. So I just want to raise that as a reality that we may face down the road if, in fact, we are forced to take action with the building structure. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Going to go to Councillor Patterson. First, go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate Councillor Smart making the motion. I also appreciate Councillor Green's, and I understand Councillor Green's comments on this. So I would like to understand two things about it. If in fact it would be, if it would require extra expertise than what we have in staff, or is this something that in fact we have members of the Heritage Commission that are also quite well versed in writing statements of significance. So I'm wondering if there would be potential for the commission to respond to this quite quickly. And I do think, because I have heard it not only from members of the Heritage Commission, but the community in general that have those same sentiments. And I think so. I think it's useful for us to have that knowledge. I ultimately, the condition of the building from the report is significantly in question as extending the life. But I think there's a value to understand what you're losing also.
Just going to lay out there my understanding of the process if this passes, which is it would go to staff. Staff do that work if either using a consultant or internal staff. Then it goes to the Heritage Commission for review, and they provide that review of it, and through that process comes back with the final report. I think that's my understanding of the process. Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, you've just reiterated what's included in the establishing bylaw for the Commission, so that would be the process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smart?
Yes, and I will add that the Commission offered to draft the statement of significance, but it is not in their mandate, and they may prepare a loose draft that would assist staff with the process.
Thank you. And often are helpful in research. Before, I already had first and second speakers here. Go ahead, Councillor. Before you speak again, I'm just going to speak briefly. I think the motion as it stands, actually, to my mind, is very supportable. In fact, in some ways, more so given the report we just got. Because this is not designation, this is a statement of significance, which even if which would inform whether or not it goes on the Heritage Registry, but that registry and the statement of significance process is there to help capture the stories and the history of these buildings. And yes, we lose them sometimes, but this provides this opportunity in that process to make sure that we capture those stories. And if we're making the decision, frankly, if we're now looking at this pretty significant report we have in front of us, if that moves us on the path of demolition, I think it's more important than ever that we capture the stories of these buildings before they get lost, if that's the situation that happens. So I'm very supportive of this. It's I think part of our due diligence as stewards of the community that we capture these narratives before we lose them. And so I'm supportive of the motion as it stands. Councillor Smart, you had your hand to continue. Oh.
I just wanted to add just very briefly that there may be something too that comes out of this report, like that where there's portions of it that can be saved. We don't know what kind of creative solutions are going to come forward as we, look at this shocking report. We just need to have all the information when we make our decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Green, and then Watson. Sorry.
And I appreciate all of my colleagues' comments on this. I really do. And my only concern is that we don't raise expectations that we can save a building that ultimately is not salvageable. So that's my biggest concern. However, I will support the motion because I'm a heritage advocate and I believe in it. But that's my only caution. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. First, just a comment. Just following up on what you yourself have said, I think that it is important for us to understand all the aspects of the asset that we need to make decisions about. So I do support that we collect that information and we have that in front of us. Just a question of clarification, though, about what would go forward. There was some suggestion at the table that the Heritage Commission themselves might be the authors of this, but then Councillor Smart seemed to say that they are not allowed to do that because it's not within their scope. So I guess a clarification from staff, if we direct or move to direct this work, how will that actually happen? Who will do it before it goes to the Heritage Commission?
We let Mr. Bull go too early here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ms. Williams. I think we're.
If Mr. Bowl is here, I'd be happy to defer to him.
I don't see him online here.
Thank you, Your Worship. In his absence, I can confirm that the bylaw that establishes the Heritage Commission lays out that staff or a consultant will prepare a statement of significance, which will be reviewed by the Heritage Commission.
Thank you. So the motion is live on the floor right now. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Just for the record, Councillor Appleton is still actively engaged on here, so if he's opposed, he would speak up. So that carries. Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Smart, you had the floor. Otherwise, no. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. And I would also like to make a motion arising that this is a significant project, and it's one that has been in a really large conversation piece for members of the public. So I would make a motion that we refer this to a future special meeting of council at the earliest possible date that can be scheduled to determine next step action items.
I don't suppose you have that in writing that you could send to the thing. Did you? Okay. I moved. Moved and seconded. Go ahead. You probably should motivate on this one, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. I do appreciate that we have had a considerable amount of information provided within these reports, both by our staff and by the consultants, which I appreciate. There is still, though, a lot to be done, and perhaps with putting our minds towards it, there may be other reports that we want to obtain to inform public discussion around this. So I think that while we may not reach all decisions at a future meeting of council, I think it warrants it that be brought to a special meeting of council to focus on the marina and the lands adjacent to the marina and the buildings, and start the conversation happening.
Okay. I have it moved and seconded. I just want to make sure that we got the wording. It says item B, the report, I guess, because that's really be referred to a future special meeting of council at the earliest possible date to determine next step action items. Is that sufficient to what you want? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just a question to clarify, is it next step action items related to just dealing with this report or to the sort of visioning and goals of the whole marina site in general?
Councillor Patterson?
I think that's why I wanted a special meeting of council, so that we can actually determine the action items that the council feels and the sequencing of how those action items will take place. Because there is, certainly as Councillor Smart has referred to, there is a broader community aspect to this. But I think that there's some important pieces of information that may be necessary to help council have that discussion with the community. And, this may be one of the first meetings that we will have, with subsequent meetings to follow.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question about the process or content or format of such a meeting as the one you're suggesting, and we certainly need some process as our next step. I'm just wondering out loud, without having time to discuss anything about what it would look like, how would the public even be engaged at that point in time? Like how can we make that a useful council engagement without even having pre-work done on what would happen at that meeting? Because you did speak to alacrity, and I'm just concerned that if we move too fast, we aren't actually really ready to have the appropriate discussion. So that's really a question back to Councillor Patterson or anybody around the table who'd like to ruminate.
Yeah. I might just to that, and Councillor Patterson, I'll let you respond to it, but I think there may be some value here of asking staff to come back with some options for having that discussion, because I think that needs to have I can tell you as a chair, it needs some structure, or we're going to have a very difficult conversation to kind of nail down what it is we're talking about. But I'll go back to you, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And respectfully, I understand that it would be good to have staff's opinion on perhaps how we could perceive this, but I think that we have been through this process once, and we obviously need to have a different plan of action this time. I don't have any perceived notion on what that will be, but I think that that trying to discuss the marina within the context of council meeting with many other items on the agenda doesn't bring it the focus that it needs. And so to get into all of referring it back to staff, to have staff bring forward their ideas on how this should proceed, while it would be worthwhile, I think it would be also very worthwhile to at least me to hear from members of council in a more fulsome discussion on other things that might be required, like a dock inspection or a phase 3 environmental inspection. We haven't had discussion around the council table on that, and for staff to bring us back their recommendations, we would have to give them some guidance as to what we might want to see by way of other information to get this process started.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I really appreciate this coming forward. After receiving this report, I think it's so important that we look to the bigger picture of how we can move forward on this site. I do have similar feelings to what you mentioned, Mayor, around having staff prepare a few options that at least we could respond to in that meeting to give it more context. So I'm not sure if Councillor Patterson would be amenable to amending the motion at all to reflect, I guess, directing staff to come back with some options, some land use options that could be a part of that meeting.
Just procedurally here, because we do need to move on with the meeting. We have lots of other things to deal with. Procedurally, this could be either amended, defeated, or it could be referred to staff to come back with options for, for enacting a future meeting. But this is a bit of motions arising are often better written out a little bit more. This is a bit of not an atypical issue slightly here with this. But I will, Councillor Braithwaite, do you have a thing? And I'll go back to Councillor Patterson, because the question was essentially asked by Councillor Smart.
Perhaps to simplify this, I would like to confirm that this matter, because of the magnitude of the development itself and the time that it could take to work through this, I would like to see it come back at the earliest possible date to get this started. And if that requires that staff direct us on what they think the best process is, then that's fine as a starting point. But I would like to see it come back at the earliest possible opportunity. And so perhaps we could have some confirmation on when that might be if we were to refer it back to staff to come forward with their recommendation.
It's your motion, Councillor Patterson. I'm not sure how to ask staff to answer that question, but Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's hard to give a definitive answer to that without knowing the scope of what next steps action items refers to, and specifically if it's related to the facilities. I wonder if it wouldn't be helpful to provide an alternative that staff provide a report outlining options for next steps in connection with future land use considerations on the Turkey Head property in consultation with the community and First Nations.
I'll go back to the mover right now. We have a motion live on the floor. I appreciate the offer to come up with the suggestion to kind of reflect some of the conversation. Councillor Patterson, this is your motion. Where are you at with this?
Yes, Mayor, I sense around the table that there is not an appetite to support the motion, so I will withdraw the motion.
Is the seconder? I can't remember who seconded it now. I think Councillor. I seconded. You seconded it. Are you willing to have it withdrawn? It takes a willingness of the mover and the seconder to withdraw a motion once it's made.
I actually support the concept of doing it this way, and I'll tell you why. It's become a much more complex issue than it was a year ago, and there are so many moving parts now. So I guess my only concern is that it would occur at a special council meeting, not on a shared agenda, because I think it's that important. So that's part of why I supported the motion. I agree with a special council meeting format.
I think if it's withdrawn, we can maybe retry it with sort of some of the wording that Ms. Williams has suggested, and so leave it that kind of wording in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's retracted then at this point. So if I might just ask you to, can you put that up on screen, what you suggested, and if somebody wishes to move it, we'll deal with that. If not, then we will, oh, not yet typed in. Okay, Councillor Smart, you wanted to add something before as this coming
Oh,
up?
I was just going to offer to move the motion.
It's like having it in writing, just so people at home who may not have audio issues or hearing issues, or that all of us understand what the, yeah, Councillor Appleton, I'm sure, is paying attention and listen to it, but sometimes you get the nuance of the words when you see it writing is different. So, if I might suggest, just is it possible to provide a report, like in July? We have, I think, 1 or 2 meetings in July for that to come back, just with some high-level options. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would say that that's probably not a possibility during the month of July with the workload that we have coming before council over the next few meetings, but we could certainly aim to have it back here for first meeting in September or early September.
If we need it sooner than that, if council feels they need it sooner than that, that should be written into the motion, I guess, is all I would suggest. Hearing what you're saying, that it may not be possible to have a substantive report attaching to it. So the motion, just I'm going to read it in case people can't see it, that staff provide a report outlining options for next steps in connection with land use consideration on the Turkey Head property in consultation with the community and First Nations. Is there a mover of that motion?
She already moved it.
Oh, sorry, moved and seconded. Thank you. Is the mover in the second want to speak to the motion?
I, as well as council, and I'm sure, and the entire community are so excited about the potential of this property, and I think it's time for us to more proactively move forward and hear from everyone at this time what their thoughts are on next steps for moving forward with this space for our community. And I think September is a fantastic time for engagement. So as much as I would like to see it right away, I think September is actually better than July from the point of view of public being present.
Councilor Braithwaite?
Yeah, I would agree with those comments, and I think that, to me, this is, if we can get it to come back as quickly as possible, and if September is as quickly as possible with staff's workload, then I appreciate that, and I think I agree with Councillor Smart that September is a good time for engagement.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson? And then
Clarification, please. When we talk about land use, is that limited to land use, or is it, does the land use include discussion of a marina park?
Mover and seconder okay with that change? Okay. Councillor Patterson, anything else? Councillor Watson?
Yes, so just a request for clarification. In the motion as it's drafted at the moment, I'm not clear if it implies that the consultation happens in order for the staff to provide the report, or if staff are going to provide a report which then suggests subsequent phases of consultation. I don't mean to be pedantic, but I am not quite sure what's intended here.
No, I think it's a good question to ask. I read it as the report will come back to kind of give us options to guide the community consultation piece, but Mrs. Williams, just make sure that we're in alignment with staff on this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. That is correct. And it also gives us time to make some arrangements and find some timelines that's going to work with the First Nations as well.
Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
And yes, just to follow up, is it also the intention that this report be coming to a special council meeting? And have we lost that in here, or is that not the intention?
Ms. Williams, I might suggest that we leave it language as is temporarily, and just because it may need to have that, but it may be able to come to a regular council meeting as well. And if it's coming to September, I think if it was in July, we'd have to, because there's no way of any other way of doing it. But that'd be my suggestion, is that we don't be that specific, because it might be faster to actually leave it at a regular council meeting. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And appreciating this, I guess one of my concerns is that in order to look at the overall development at Turkey Head and potential future uses of it, it is important to have clarification, in my opinion, of the condition of the docks, because the financial overview of what we should consider at the development will depend on the condition and the value of the docks to factor into the financial overview of it. And if we try to wait until the fall to get the inspection done, I don't think it may not get done this year, and that could substantially push out the date by which decisions can be made.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. I can support the motion as it stands. I would like to, as per some other councillors' comments, I would like us, and I would like staff to consider heading forward to retain the idea, or at least not lose track of the idea of a standalone meeting specifically to discuss this item. I think that there's some visioning that needs to be done in a more open forum. I think it's tough to fit in sort of a broad-ranging discussion completely within a council agenda. So I think we might be able to receive this report in a regular council meeting, but I would sure like to see a standalone council meeting, or preferably committee of the whole, to talk about this one item. I think that there's a broad-ranging discussion that needs to happen. Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Appleton. I think at this point that's entirely likely, but I think just not restricted in the motion at this point. I might even, yes, I have some thoughts on ways to bring this forward, but it don't have to be done in the meeting here, so don't see any other hands up, so I'm happy to call the question on the motion that's in front of us. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed, that carries. Any other motions arising on this item? I'm looking not just the marina, but the broader land use questions as well, and a process that we're going to undertake as we go forward in consideration of this. And it's important, I think, that we have that conversation here in this chamber and with the public's input on it as well. So, and with the First Nations, which I think is dearly needed. And I know there's been a lot of work happening staff to staff at this point with to build some of those connections. So I look forward to that coming forward as well. Anything else on this before we move on? Yeah, Councillor Watson.
Yes, I would like to move a motion arising to support what Councillor Patterson's brought forward. I'd like to move that actually during the summer that we retain a consultant to get a condition of the dock survey, just as we've done for the marine buildings. So that a motion to have that condition survey done for the docks. That's my motion arising.
I will second that.
Moved and seconded. Just want to make sure I'm not out of keeping with Robert's Rules and Procedure bylaw. We had a motion on this not long ago, but I think it was more than 6 months ago, where the consideration of condition of the docks was considered and not moved forward. I just don't know if procedurally, are we okay to revisit this? I think, Ms. Bay?
Your Worship, I'll let the other side of the table here comment on the procedural components of it, but I can confirm that that discussion happened at the same time as Council directed staff to proceed with this bunch of studies that were discussed tonight, and that was, I believe I said, the end of March.
So then procedurally, I'm not sure, what's the mechanism here where we've had a council decision? I guess a council decision excluding something does not necessarily mean we've decided not to do it. Mr. Coates?
Thank you, Your Worship. So there's so the reconsideration possibilities have lapsed now because it's more than 30 days since council passed its original or made its original decision, and that involved not proceeding with this work. So there's sort of two things that would have to be one of two things would have to be present in order to enable that to come back on the table. One would be that the motion would be substantively different in some form or another from what was under consideration at the time. And the other thing, the other possibility is that council's received new information that that it didn't have before in relation to that matter that would prompt council to take action to the contrary of what the decision was originally.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, the motion as it stands is a little bit out of order because we can't just...
Your Worship, that would be your call as chair, of course, but if you're asking for procedural advice from me, I would agree with that representation of it, that there hasn't been substantively new information provided, and the motion is essentially the same that council chose not to move forward with. I think if I heard right, back in January or March, sorry. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just to the mover, I think what I'm just for comfort here on this one, we had that discussion about information we need to kind of look at the site. I think I consider it to be in order because I think it was essentially, well, we had a vote on it, so it's a bit difficult. But I might just suggest what I hear coming back next is a look at how we're going to address the entirety of the site, look at various approaches at that point, and at that point we could consider moving forward with some additional assessments if that's deemed to be required. But that's just my take on it. Councillor Watson, if you think it's sufficiently important that we do it now before we have that conversation, I'll take your arguments and then I'll make a determination whether I think it's in order or not.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to follow up on what Director Coates has referred to, which is receiving new information. I think tonight we received a lot of new, very difficult information, which suggests that things are that it makes it all the more imperative to have a fulsome picture of the entire asset that we're responsible for. And because the news is so discouraging with respect to the three buildings, I think it would be we'd be blinding ourselves to not ask for more information because we have received more information. We know that an
Councillor
asset.
Watson, for clarity, the buildings are our assets.
Yes, I know.
The
Docks are not
our assets. Just for clarification here, we're not looking for an asset thing on our assets. We're looking at doing an asset assessment on a third party's ownership assets. Just for that context in there.
Okay, let me just, however, it is still an asset that forms part of the potentiality of the overall site because we do lease the water on which those structures are located. So I think I would still stick to my argument that knowing what we know now about what we own on the upland, it behooves us to actually understand fully the whole picture before we start engaging with the community in a fulsome way.
Okay, so just as a chair and in the interest of moving things on here, I will consider it to be in order. take your point that there's been materially new information that will impact it. At the end of the day, this is essentially a governance decision whether or not we want this information at all on the third party's assets. And secondly, if we need the information more urgently prior to the next step that we're going to go through. So that's going to be the question here. So the motion will stand. It's been moved and seconded to ask for a condition assessment on the docks at this point. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. I can't support that until I think after the next conversation that we have with the information that we get back from staff. But thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Is there any? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I am supportive at some point of obtaining this information, particularly not just with this report we received today, but it was, actually thinking about the provincial lease arrangements and the liability aspects there. But I don't feel strongly that it needs to happen now. So I feel torn as to whether to support it now versus at some point.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And the reason I support this going forward now is because certainly we've learned now that the gangway connection now is also somewhat in question as to the condition of it. And that, in my mind, that is something that is under the responsibility of the marina operator to in fact ensure the integrity of those components. And this component is questionable. We don't know what other might be questionable, and even though it is another party that the fixtures belong to, I think they still are recognized as a district impact for condition and liability should things happen, even whether they're not our liability. But I think that would be perhaps a perception of the public using the facility. So I think that's important. If it was not so critically important that the dock inspection be carried out during advantageous weather, that this could potentially push it out an additional year, that will certainly affect how I think about development on the site. And so I think it's really important to go forward with this.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton and Green.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to be able to support the motion as it sits right now. I think that council's discussed this and made a decision quite recently. I think in light of the information that we've received today, I think not to state that the docks themselves are becoming peripheral. They are not. They are an asset. But this is very quickly becoming a very large discussion about a significant capital expenditure. And frankly, to be direct, the dock condition at this stage of the game is very quickly becoming, not insignificant, but certainly significantly less of an exigency as the overall status of the site overall. So I'm not willing to revisit this at this time. I think we need to receive the information that we've just directed staff to give us and to have that conversation with the community about a concept, essentially view heading forward. So I'm not willing to go into this level of detail at this point. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then I'll speak.
I will be brief. One of my concerns is the information we did receive tonight about the dynamic between concrete and salt water, and the anchoring docking at that marina, the initial docking that holds everything else, the integrity of that structure. It's a cement structure. As you go down the gangway, and Mr. Graham, I hope you can. I haven't been down there in a while, but that really, the whole integrity of the dock system relies on that anchoring of that cement gangway or cement dock. So I guess not knowing what condition that dock is in, that anchoring dock, and not knowing, and being concerned about, at the end of the day, the safety of the public who use it, it's information that I would appreciate. So I will support the motion. I understand the comments from my colleagues, but I respectfully will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My comments, I'm not going to support the motion. I do appreciate that it probably is helpful information. We've had this debate I think it's, no harm in having this conversation again. My recollection of the discussion we had last time, I think still stands, is that the buildings, the envelopes, the land belongs to the district. Those are our responsibilities. Those are our liabilities. We have every responsibility of making sure that we're making decisions in that context. The value of the docks, the condition of the docks, may change quite considerably and materially in the next 4.5 years, which is the earliest time that we have to take over ownership or have them removed. So a condition assessment in 2023 is not necessarily of much valuable information as we make that decision, and does not necessarily impact our consideration of the upland use at this time. So I think those arguments still stand. There's no harm in having it raised here again today, but I'm not going to support the motion as it stands. I think that there's enough important work that we want to look at the values and the outcomes of the upland portion, which will help guide other considerations on the dock portion. I do want to get to a question on the motion, but go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just a quick question through you, Mayor, to staff. Do we know if the owner of the docks has done a condition assessment report themselves any time recently? Has that question been asked?
Ms. Bay, you'd probably be in the best position to answer that question.
Thank you, Your Worship. We don't know the extent of the work that they've done on assessing those docks, but we do know that as part of their proposal that they came forward with, they were originally, when they put forward their proposal as part of the last RFP, they were proposing to replace the entirety of the dock structure, and the retention of them only became the plan once we changed from the long-term 30-year lease to the 5-year lease that we now have in place.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Through you, Mayor, is that a report that that we potentially, they obviously have done some work to study that, then is that something that we have seen or that we then potentially could request to see the work that they've already done?
Ms. Bay?
Your Worship, I'll reiterate that I don't know what work was done, but I can say that they were proposing, and that was a part of a public document that they put forward, that they were proposing to replace the docks as part of their proposal for the 30-year lease. So one can make assumptions based on that, perhaps, but yeah. Obviously, the economics weren't there when we changed that to a 5-year horizon.
I think in fairness, we don't know the causes of that thing. There was a number of enhancements that required significant work, such as improvements to the fire suppression system, improvements, addition of a sewage pump out system, et cetera, that may have impacted the ability to retrofit as opposed to piece. So I don't want to read too much into that replacement piece. I think it's important that we, at the end of the day too, their assessment would have been now probably 4 years old, so it may not be directly relevant to the current condition. Councillor Smart, did you have anything else to follow up? Okay. I'm happy to call the question. Oh, sorry, I have Councillor Appleton. You have your hand up. I'm not sure if that's a legacy hand or if you want to speak again. Hand came down. Okay, so I'm going to call the question. The motion is to move forward with the condition survey for the docks, the Oak Bay Marina docks. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Appleton, Councillor Braithwaite, and Mayor Murdoch opposed. That will move forward. That passes. All right. Any other motions arising on this item? Not seeing any. We are well beyond our time here, so I'm just going to ask us to focus on maintaining a healthy speed. We are, by my schedule, 1 hour behind our available time to finish this on time. So not to rush anybody, but next item is subject to public input. If any members of the public wish to address us, then on this item, which is the annual report, please indicate so online at this time. With that, I'm going to go to Mr. Coates, who will provide an overview and introduction. Thank you very much to the engineers for coming in this evening and sticking around to the very end of that discussion, well past where we were getting to your work and on to other items. So thank you so much. Have a great evening. Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Your Worship. And taking your cue, I'll be brief with my synopsis of the report before you, which in and of itself is quite brief, but this is the 2022 annual report, so information contained in that document are retrospective on the year past. And so generally speaking, it's an amalgamation of a number of different pieces of information and reports that are prepared for other purposes. The annual report serves as a bit of a central location for that kind of key financial information, as well as Housing Council's priorities and some issues around progress reporting and benchmarking of them. While the information changes from year to year, what's new for the report this year is some enhanced graphic representations as we've looked to make improvements over previous years. I'd also just like to note too that this information is contributed by all the departments in the municipality, so it's very much a snapshot of the entire operations of the municipality. As required by the community charter, this has been advertised for a couple of weeks to the public so that they are aware of the fact that council is going to be considering it tonight, and also that they have an opportunity to provide any comments that the members of the public might like to make to council. I'd note that we've not received any comments on the annual report as advertised and published. And essentially, we're all here to answer any questions you might have on any of the information contained within.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, what an excellent report, and I'm sure a joy to read for everybody. There was one piece of information that wasn't in the report that I really wanted to see, and that was where are we at with our climate targets, and just with regards to how much we have fallen short and how much we have to do each year now to make our 2030 targets. And I just question for staff would be, with all of this potential funding that would support climate initiatives, what does staff need from council as far as direction to ensure that we are tracking this, because we are in a climate emergency and we do not have a climate action plan, and we do not have a council priority project to deal with climate, and we can't just be ignoring this.
I think process-wise here, Mr. Coates, correct me if I'm wrong, we just take some general direction, and it doesn't even have to be by motion, that we include climate information in future financial plans or in the annual report. But Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Worship. So just a couple of things. Certainly, that direction would be well received by staff. I know that the reason that it's not there is because that information hasn't been compiled, if I understand correctly. And so I would note that in one of the next items coming forward, the Q2 update, there is some additional thinking around how that might take shape. And so just as a tickler for Ms. Bay and Ms. Williams in the Q2 update, that there is some information there that you might wish to consider to help drive that forward a little quicker. But we will certainly take that away, and to the extent we have information available, we'd be happy to include it in the 2023 annual report.
Thank you. And I think it's important for members of the public and council to know this has sort of been an iterative process. We first got, I would call, a modern financial or annual report about 4 years ago, which the council at the time took a fair bit of time looking at metrics. We looked at both what metrics we had and then what metrics we wanted, and tried to find the metrics that we had that we wanted in there that wouldn't be onerous to keep on an annual basis, and we've tried to keep those consistent so people can see year over year. And certainly this would be a rational one to include that and to have a synopsis of the climate. So, but iteratively every year we've kind of looked at, okay, we get the annual report, we get feedback, we look at it, and we provide feedback on how do we make it better the next year. And so that kind of information flows into it. So in that spirit, I think we don't need a motion. We just take that as I think everybody would agree here. We want that data to be included, and we probably do need to provide some supports to make that happen. I have Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Green. Did I see the hand? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor, and I certainly agree with Mr. Coates. The graphics were very nice this year, because it was really pleasant to be able to look at some of the faces of the folks that actually do work around the district, and obviously from the report, the extent of their work is considerable. I do have a couple of pointers that I would like maybe staff to consider for future reports. I do notice that the interest earnings and reserve fund balances increased significantly while the capital project spending was really diminished. So we on implementing the projects. And so that the implementation of the projects is still well below what is required to reduce risk in 10 to 15 years. So I think perhaps somehow linking some of the summary comments in the annual report back to the sustainable infrastructure and asset management would be very helpful to people. Both the 2021 and 2022 reports indicate very high rates of staff turnover. This year, particularly senior staff turnover. And turnover often means reduced productivity, increased expenses for recruitment and training, and lower morale across the organization. And it particularly poses challenges for small communities like Oak Bay because of limited staff available to cover vacancies. So if possible, I am hopeful that in the future report that has stabilized a lot and there will be positive comments, but if we could frame it for a future report to come back to, that would be wonderful. And the increase of emergency events throughout the province has raised the issue of local communities having plans and preparedness to address issues. I understand the province is currently reviewing the Emergency Program Act to ensure all communities have plans. And while local councils may delegate authority for those plans, they don't delegate the responsibility. That responsibility always lies with council. So I think it would be appropriate to provide an update on progress that is taking place in this district in our annual reports on a go-forward basis. And the last item, last September, Council approved the resolution to provide performance measures and progress on the district's housing initiatives in the annual reports. I think that is something that's increasingly going to be expected of communities. This report indicates that secondary suites program really yielded very, very small results on adoption of that program. Seems to be lower than what I think some of us were anticipating. And as we move forward with more housing options, it would be really nice if we could have a section perhaps in the annual report that was dedicated to moving forward with those. And that may change because it's partly based on our anticipated growth per the OCP, the regional growth strategy, and what is yet to come from the province. So those are my suggestions, perhaps just for future reports, and thank you for the 2022 report.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I just want to remind, though, this is, by its very nature, is a sort of an apolitical document that talks about results specific to the year in. So we have to be a little bit careful that we're not giving too much direction, and I don't think you can cross that line, but just keep in mind that we are there to make sure we're providing consistent and constant information to the public about what was done and not trying to create too much of a narrative around it, because that's the job of this report is in many ways not to be that document. It's to sort of report honestly out on the financial and other outcomes. But sometimes that context is required, so some language in there that address those points I think is well taken. I have Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and thank you, through you, to everyone who participated in the preparation of this document. It is a good-looking document for sure, and provides some really good information. And I did have some feedback from a few residents. One was, would it be possible to reference Lekwungen cultural and historical lands in the context statement, also our Oak Bay? Would that be possible? We have done the land acknowledgement, granted, but they wondered if it would be possible to somehow reference the context of where we are. And so that's under the our Oak Bay at the beginning of the report. And that's the only feedback I had. Thank you.
Thank you. The other feedback I'd like to see in future ones is just look at adding into the structure of this some sort of like a 2-page executive summary that creates a standardized financial reporting, very high level, and other key metrics, just so this is a wonderful document that the information is all there. It's also a very big document, and sometimes we just, if people can have an executive summary they can go to and compare year over year, I think that would be really valuable. I know we kind of set it aside the first couple of years because we were still working on how we did it, but I think it's time for 2023 that we look at, including that. And I spoke to staff about that before. I don't think it's any big issue, but I think that would be very helpful to the public to have some easier to read synopsis of where we're at on those pieces as well. Okay. Any other suggestions or feedback? And I'm just going to last chance for the public to add any comments here before I go to motions. I don't see anybody online. Nobody in the room here from the public seems to be wishing to address us. So I will come back to this table and the request here is to have receipt. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Any discussion on receipt? All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? And then annual report for approval.
Move approval.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. We move on to item. This also is for public input. If you wish to address us on this matter, which is the second quarter council priorities update, please raise your hand on the online app at this point. If you're calling in, you have to hit *9 to raise your hand, and we'll call on you before I get to the motions. I believe we have Ms. Bay here, our Director of Strategic Initiatives. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And because this is the first in this council, I thought maybe it would be helpful just to set a little bit of a context on the council priorities plan and how it fits into some of the other reports, and how we do this reporting as we go through the term, and how adjustments are made. This report provides a second quarter update on year-to-date progress on council's priority projects. The report also offers council the opportunity to consider an additional project to advance the district's climate and sustainability related projects and programs. And so this is the one that Mr. Coates alluded to earlier on, may be related to the concern that was just raised at the table with respect to getting more information on climate related targets. Regular update reports relaying progress on council's priorities support transparency and accountability, which we know is very important to council and indeed to staff as well. This is the first progress report for this council priorities plan, and I'm pleased to present it on behalf of the district's staff team. And so others were absolutely part of delivering on the priorities and advancing on them, and are standing behind the scenes ready to answer questions or provide more information should you want that. This report is part of the district's annual reporting package, which also includes the annual report, which was just presented. As was mentioned, that report provides departmental updates and metrics. It's typically presented at this time of year in conjunction with the Q2 update. And then we also have the financial updates that are provided by the Director of Financial Services, and the Q2 financial report is usually presented in July, so that's coming up. And then another quarterly report on the financial pieces is presented in Q3. Then there's the update on council resolutions, which is shared quarterly, and you'll see that the council resolution update is attached to the package here on the council priorities update, if you're looking for that. That has been provided by the Corporate Services Department. And then finally, we have the council priorities update, which is provided now in Q2, and then also provided at the end of Q4. So that'll be coming to you early in 2024. So moving on to the next slide, we have the context for the council priorities plan is that there's those many reports that I just talked about that are provided reflect the reality that there are really several different types of work undertaken at the district. And most of the budget and staff time goes to operating facilities, delivering ongoing services, building and maintaining the district's physical assets. So that's really the bulk of the work that happens at the district. And much of that work is predictable, but some isn't. And some of that was alluded to as we're just talking about the annual report. In some years we get more requests for service than in other years. Some years we have emergencies. Other years we may have to unexpectedly respond to senior government directives. And all of that is not necessarily factored into our predictions at the beginning of year of how much staff capacity there'll be to deliver on council priorities. So if that comes up during the year, that might require another discussion about our capacity to take on new projects or the timelines that have been assigned to the projects that we've been given. This year has seen a significant increase in service requests from last year. Between January of this year and the end of May, we saw a 30% increase in service requests over the same time period last year. So we received over 1,000 service requests year to date, and those service requests, the nature of them are spelled out in your reports if you look at attachment 3. But things like potholes and overflowing garbage bins, graffiti, those types of service requests, and we really encourage people to when they see things that need to be fixed in the community, to let us know about those. We also know that they're not always reported, right? So it's not a full reflection of all the work that the district does, because those are just the ones that the public calls in. So we've also received new provincial directions regarding housing supply that we've had to take considerable time to respond to. And whatever time is left after we do the essentials of our ongoing operating responsibilities, that's what we have available to deliver on the council priorities. So those council priorities were identified by council at an open meeting in November 2022. Those council priority by theme area are housing, livability, transportation, climate change and environment, diversity and inclusion, and truth and reconciliation. So those are the big buckets of items. And then you've chosen, if we go to the next slide, priority projects to deliver on council's priorities. Those were identified by council earlier this year. And then through the budget process, you provided funding to carry out those projects. And those funded projects, once they're confirmed in the 5-year financial plan, are then listed in the council priorities plan. And so you'll see the council priorities plan attached as attachment 1. Moving on, I think it's important to note here that as much as we have a council priorities plan and it has 29 initiatives in it at this point, that doesn't mean that council is stuck on that particular mix of priorities. 4 years can be a long time, especially when we consider the context that changes both in the community and in terms of our relationship to the broader world, and council, with your ears to the ground, are the ones that bring those concerns from the community back to the table and can say, hey, I'm hearing something different than what we heard when we were first elected, and I would like us to consider this new initiative. And when you hear that, you bring it back to the council table, and then there's really 2 paths that can be taken in response to that concern. If it's an urgent concern, you can ask for a new project impact assessment, and we will then assess that as soon as possible for staffing and budget implications, and bring that information back to you. And if you decide to fund it, then that immediately triggers that project to be listed in the council priorities plan, and then council would, and then staff would move to act on that. Recognizing that not everything can be an emergency and urgent, because then there's just not the capacity to deal with that. There's also another potential path, and that is for you to say it's important, but it can wait until the yearly discussion of priorities, which happens in the fall, typically in about November. We'd pursue the same path. We'd come back to you with information on staffing and budget impacts, but it would be done through a document we call a project backgrounder. Very similar information that would come back to you, but it would be batched with a number of other requests, and you consider those in the context of the other projects that you have on the list in the council priorities plan. You have a long list of projects that at the beginning of your mandate you identified as not being the ones you wanted us to tackle first, but you didn't want to lose sight of, and you wanted us to bring those back to you annually for reconsideration. So those project backgrounders would then be brought back for you to consider in that context. And again, if you decide to fund it, then we would list it in the council priorities plan, and we would report back on it through these quarterly reports as we're doing today. So that's the adjustment process. Each fall you have the opportunity to review and reaffirm or change your priority projects, and you'll have the chance to do that in fall, likely November, and you'll have the chance to consider those project backgrounders as well as the long list of council priorities. In terms of what's happened on the projects that you have given us to do to date, we have a progress report attached to attachment 2 of your packages. And through that, we provide a progress update on each of your 29 projects. So in summary, I can say we've completed one project. The Fire Master Plan was completed early on. We've started 16 projects, and we have planned to start an additional 10 before the end of the year, leaving just 2 slated to commence in future years. And that was really as per what the original plan was. So that's not something that's changed. So really all but 3 of the projects I think are proceeding as per originally contemplated timelines. And it's not that the 3 that are listed there are necessarily late. It's just ones that we're flagging that we might need to come back to you for a discussion about those timelines, just given some of the other things that are going on right now. So design Carnarvon Park building, that work is being overseen by the same staff person who's also been tackling a lot of other unexpected projects that were unexpected at the beginning of this year. Our wonderful David Graham, facilities manager, he's got a lot on his plate. As wonderful as he is, he still can't duplicate himself. We did find that he had to spend a lot of time working on building issues at the library, working to find new space for district staff, the new hires, and assisting with the advancement of the marina-related studies that you just had on the agenda. So that is just has delayed his ability to initiate work on the design of the Carnarvon Park building. And then the other 2 projects listed there, the changing rules for home-based businesses and implementing the GHG and energy reduction in buildings. Those would be done again by our wonderful planning and building staff. They have had their plates very full with doing background work on the Growing Communities Fund, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and preparing for the province's new housing directives. So we will be coming back with an update early in 2024 in terms of what once we more fully understand what the impact of those new demands are, and we'll be able to provide you a better indication at that time of what the timeline implications are. And then if you have questions about any of the other projects, we do, as I mentioned earlier, have the relevant directors in attendance tonight to answer questions. So in addition to the 29 projects approved in the council priority plan, over the past 6 months, council has requested that staff bring forward resourcing implications information on the projects that are listed on the overhead there. They're taking one of the 2 paths that I talked about earlier on. So a few of them we're planning to come back with project impact analyses. Belcourt at B Street we're planning on bringing back in July with a new project impact analysis. And Cedar Hill Corner is on a timeline we still need to work out with our Director of Community Building and Planning. Then we have coming back with a project backgrounder, the property maintenance bylaw, so that would come back in the fall. And then we have a couple of projects there that we're planning to bring back as part of project backgrounders, assuming that they stay on the list associated with the Growing Communities Fund allocation. So you'll recall that council's had some discussions around how you want to allocate that fund. In fact, there's an item on the agenda just shortly after this. So there's if those continue to be considerations and council wants us to explore those, we'd come back with additional information on how those projects would be carried out in the fall. And if these timelines do not work for you, if you don't want to wait until the fall and you want that information more urgently, then you can direct staff tonight to come back with new project impact analyses instead of the project backgrounders. Again, just recognizing that there are some staffing efficiencies associated with packaging them all and coming at once in the fall. In terms of information and feedback, we've got the second quarter update will be posted on our website. It's obviously here as part of this report tonight so that the public has access to it in that way. we are also, so that's the information piece, the feedback piece. So we've got an annual questionnaire open right now. As Mayor mentioned at the start of this meeting, we've got over 700 responses so far, which is fantastic. Almost, I think, 3 times. We're kind of in the order of 3 times what we received last time around, so that's wonderful. We're hoping to get some more in before the questionnaire closes approximately a week from now. So we're really, if anyone's listening here and wants to provide feedback to the district on council's priorities and the projects that have been selected to advance those priorities, that is an opportunity to provide that feedback. And I've provided the link there on the slide as to where people can find that. Then we will tabulate the responses. There's a lot of open-ended questions on this survey, so it will take us some time to make sense of that and package it. Yeah, I think we'll be upwards of over 1,000 pages of information there to digest. So it will take us a little bit of time. I know some people say, like, what do you mean you need all summer to tabulate the responses? But I think we will, just given the magnitude of information that's there. And then we'll present that to council prior to council reviewing priorities in late 2023. So you'll have information. We asked questions about how people felt about each of the projects that were on the so-called long list at the time. So before you make a decision in the fall on whether you want to advance those, you'll have some good feedback from the community as to what their thoughts are with regards to those. And then moving on to the item that I hinted at or teased earlier on, as part of the staff report that we brought back or brought to you in early May regarding the Growing Communities Fund, staff indicated that we would continue to explore the LGCAP, the Local Government Climate Action Program, as a possible funding source to increase capacity in support of climate action and sustainability initiatives, and really, as that report discussed the potential to engage a climate specialist to manage the many related projects directed by council and currently on the sides of staff desks, and those projects included those listed on the slide there. And the senior leadership team has now discussed this opportunity in more detail and broadly acknowledges that the district has a skills and capacity gap in this area, which prevents the team from effectively meeting council and community expectations. So what we're recommending is that the council direct us to prepare a new project impact analysis that would identify how we could best go about addressing that gap, and that would be go about addressing the staffing and budget implications of implementing those items. So we could bring back that here if we look at, we likely engage the services of a professional to provide some advice on that, again acknowledging that that staff are not experts. We don't currently have the expertise on staff to figure out how that could best be done, and then we would put together a new project impact analysis based on that professional's recommendations. So that would come back to you in the early fall for council's consideration and potential authorization regarding implementation. And then finally, just with respect to the main part of the report, staff recommend that the report be received and that the council priority plan be updated as necessary to reflect the timelines, next steps, and other content as set out in the update report. So, Your Worship, that concludes my comments.
Very comprehensive presentation, so I'm not sure if there's going to be a lot of questions, but if there are, we'll go there. I, again, just want to keep people focused on any.
Say thank you so much. It's a lot of work compiling all of that, but I like all the green squares. Those are my favorite. I think, would you like a motion to first receive? And
Before we get to motions, I'm just going to remind anybody, members of the public that wish to address us on this report, to just indicate they wish to speak now, and I'd like to make sure we have cast for public input before we go to motion. So questions, even late comments at this time are okay. Anything else, Councillor Green? Okay, I have Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I'm really appreciative of the report and also the suggestion to consider staffing related to sustainability. This was something that came up in the Climate Action Working Group about 5 years ago, and really pleased to see it here. I'm hoping that in that analysis, and it's a question for staff, that it might also consider a temporary position that could be renewed so that it we potentially could keep that knowledge in the district, because this is a position that is never going to go away. It's not like a discrete consultant project where it's going to be wrapped up with a bow and done. Sadly, climate issues are going to be with us for a long time. So I just wanted to know if that would be something that would be considered in that analysis, not simply hiring a consultant, but also just the impact of a temporary position that could be renewed later on if we had the funding.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Just to clarify, the consultant would be looked to provide advice on what the best way would be to provide this, but absolutely the intent would be for the consultant to look exactly at those kind of scenarios and how we might go about funding those in the long run and what might be needed over the long term.
Thank you.
And then I just had one other, perhaps more of a comment than question, but just with regards to the greenhouse gas emissions and energy reduction in buildings getting delayed yet again. This was something, again, that was a motion from the Climate Action Working Group from about 5 years ago. We're about to build more buildings, and every year that goes by, we are building the housing stock that is going to be in our community for another 50 or 70 years. And it saddens me every single building that goes up that is not in a leadership position for energy reduction. And I'm wondering if this project is too much, because I understand staff capacity, if we could just pull out the piece of new construction with the energy code and deal with that as soon as possible, so that we don't have another set of housing stock continue not to be built with our future in mind.
I think we have Mr. Bowl online. Would that be a question I should direct to him in terms of when that comes back to us, if we can look at perhaps some ways of splitting up the project? This is often the case with projects, as they're so big they take longer. We can split them up, and not always. Mr. Bowl, welcome back to the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, yeah, definitely something we can look at as part either preparing for that background. It's probably best, or the next steps for that project. Excuse me. So we'll take that into consideration, but it depends a bit what gets carved out of the whole project. There may be options for that, because particularly step code, for example, is a readily available tool that the district could further implement beyond the current steps. And then there's other things that probably need a bit more work, that probably are better fit within the execution of the whole project itself. So we'll take that into consideration as we prepare to start that project.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, and just, I guess, one further comment to that. If it isn't, if it doesn't make sense to sever, which I totally understand, I wonder if council could be presented with options of choosing whether or not that is something we are willing to delay, and what the cost of that is versus other projects.
I'm not sure how to answer that question or how it answered. I think it's more rhetorical. Okay, thank you. Are there other questions or comments at this time before I go to the last chance for the public? I don't see any members of the public indicating they wish to speak to us on this issue, so I'll consider public input closed so we can go to other pieces. But I would like to just make one little minor comment just on these pieces. I'm just going off the presentation here. I just want to make sure we're very clear, because the project backgrounders that are anticipated to come in the fall, the playground improvements, etc. One of them is to add water fountains along Beach Drive, and that was not, the backgrounder was for upgrading the water fountains, not adding ones. So make sure that we're clear on what that backgrounder would actually provide. Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship, for that correction.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
And just one other minor clarification on that. I assume even though it says Beach Drive, it would extend up to King George Terrace as well.
In fact, it's really all public fountains. So the Beach Drive portion is actually redundant as well. It was used as an example, but not necessarily exclusive. Okay, I mean those kind of details will come back with the project backgrounder for clarification, but I just to make sure that the backgrounder is as clear as possible. Okay, I don't see any other hands on questions, so I'm going to just perhaps go through the motions first to receive. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on receipt? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed?
Move the staff recommendations.
Do you want to move all of them? The priority plan be
I'll move.
updated as necessary and prepare
Yeah.
a new project analysis for the district climate and sustainability related projects?
I would like to move all of them.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on those? Those Thank you very much, staff, for flagging that need and bringing it forward as part of this piece. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. And there's also a memorandum of council resolutions that we also need to receive formally. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you. I should also just comment, it's nice to see the service calls on that sheet, just to kind of get a sense of what the staff is hearing, because quite often they're different than what we're hearing as council, so it's nice to kind of see that, and I think point made that kind of make sure that they're being flagged in both places. That's helpful, so thank you. 10.3, Going Communities Fund, update number 1. Again, this is open for public comment. I would ask any members of the public that wish to address this item to raise your hand now, and I will come back to any raised hands on the online Zoom application once we go through the presentation and the questions before we get to any motions. So, Ms. Morton. Welcome.
Thank you, Worship. I feel like I should thank Ms. Bay for kind of covering my introduction there, but I'll give a little overview of this report. So it is before you tonight as the first in what I expect will be a series of updates regarding the Growing Communities Fund. Staff's initial report regarding the Growing Communities Fund was presented at the May 8th Council meeting, and at that meeting, Council allocated a total of $2,750,000 in GCF funds to 5 projects, and those are outlined in attachment 1 of the report. Council also directed by resolution that staff bring forward the balance of projects to a future meeting and for staff to explore the eligibility of several new project ideas. So attachment 2 brings forward the list of staff suggested projects presented on May 8th that were not approved by Council for GCF allocation. And attachment 3 includes an initial high-level assessment and staff comments regarding the eligibility of the potential new projects. So of the little more than 4.7 million in Growing Communities funds that the district received back in March, 2,023,000 remains unallocated. And you'll note in the report that several of the new projects outlined in attachment 3 would indeed be eligible for GCF funding. And so to move those projects forward, the next step would involve some additional project scoping. Staff are proposing that this could be achieved through the preparation of project backgrounders for Council Priorities Plan review in the fall. And there's a few reasons for that recommended approach. And first, sort of focusing back on the principal objective of the Growing Communities Fund to increase the local housing supply with investments in housing initiatives, community infrastructure, and amenities. Further to that thought, since the initial staff report back in early May, Oak Bay has been selected as part of the first cohort of 10 municipalities to receive the provincial housing targets. Staff expect to receive those targets sometime in the summer, and to our knowledge, provincial legislative changes associated with the BC Homes for People Action Plan are still expected in the fall. So meeting provincial expectations and requirements related to both the housing target order and legislative changes, once those are known, will likely require a review of recommended adjustments to work plans, possibly a review of the scope and scale of in-stream or planned housing initiatives, and possibly to infrastructure planning and capital priorities, especially if the province is expecting a level of growth that exceeds what has been anticipated through the infill strategy. And that strategy anticipates more incremental and dispersed growth. So depending on the anticipated impacts and recommended adjustments, this could alter Council's priorities for the use of those Growing Communities funds. As well, considering these projects as part of the Council Priorities Plan review will allow for them to be considered and prioritized in conjunction with the potential future projects, or as Ms. Bay referred to them, the long list of projects as they're sometimes referred to, identified in the Council Priorities Plan. And finally, this will allow staff some additional time to complete the 2 in-stream new project impact analyses for projects that may also be eligible for GCF funding, and those are the Bowker at B Street project and the OCP update and community consultation process for Cedar Hill Corner. So maybe not so in short, the staff recommendation to proceed with further scoping of the new project ideas through project backgrounders that will feed into the council priorities plan review process in the fall will enable work to still proceed around the project scoping and planning, with the main benefit of providing staff with some time to confirm, consider, and report back to council on several interconnected pieces of information in the meantime. Of course, as Ms. Bay pointed out, should council wish to consider these projects prior to the fall to that review process, then council could direct preparation of a new project impact assessments as soon as possible. So that concludes my remarks, Your Worship, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morden. Are there any questions of staff on the report that's in front of us? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Morden, for the report. Does get a little overwhelming after a while. However, I just want to clarify that for a number of the items that are recommended for the project backgrounders, that I guess everything except the lighting at the sports field, all of the other projects do include with the backgrounder considerations that they will also take into consideration being accessible to people with disabilities.
Thank you. It's been discussed many times, and yes, the answer is yes. Thank you. Any other questions? I don't know if I saw any other hands coming up. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Morden. That was great. And I really, again, it's wonderful to see how many things are underway and qualify for grant funding. I mean, it saves small municipalities like ours the access to grants. Just a quick question, and it's not, and I should have thought about it earlier, but there are concerns about the capacity of trash containers at our park sites, particularly Willows, I believe. I just wondered, is it possible to, if say we wanted to redesign and replace trash containers, is that something that would be included under the umbrella of, a project like upgrading washrooms at Cattle Point and Willows Beach? How easy is it to include something or not, I guess is my question, that has come to light more recently? Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Morden.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we could certainly get clarity around that through the project scoping process. As far as adding parks amenities, there's certainly an eligible expenditure under Growing Communities funds, and I'm not sure if maybe Mr. Meikle would have a further comment from sort of an operational perspective there.
I think if I might just, if that's something that we wish to add, I would just suggest we do it as a motion, like a notice of motion process, so that the wording can be clear and be provided, because there's no, we'd have time for that within our process to have it included in the fall as well.
I simply wanted to make sure that it was possible before, bringing forward something, and I didn't want to spring it on anybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Did I see other hands on this side? Got Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. And through you, is it appropriate to ask a question on one of the items that says that it's not likely to be eligible?
Yes,
is that okay? So it's for number 11, the track replacement at Oak Bay High, and it does say that under the eligible category, staff have said it's not likely to see your comments. And then under the comments, it says that it's not likely to be eligible for the allocation from the GCF, but staff could assess options for shifting funding from previously reserved fund projects with the GCF allocation to provide an alternate funding source. Is that something that how would I go about looking at having something like that done?
Ms. Morden, you got the hard questions, don't you? Go ahead, Ms. Morden.
Thank you. So that suggestion had actually come from Mr. Payne, and I just included it as an option if council wanted to give such direction, and he may wish to pipe up at this time in terms of some of the details around that.
Mr. Payne, do you wish to add a comment?
Sure, yes. Good evening, Your Worship, through you. A grant contribution is actually relatively simple, considering the challenge of the other projects. In my mind, the council resolution to provide a grant using funding sources that were previously allocated to the projects on this list that are now funded by the GCF grant would be sufficient, and we would just proceed like that. In my mind, I think it's relatively simple direction.
Thank you.
don't see a lot of other questions popping up here, so perhaps no indications from the public they wish to address members of council on this item. Perhaps I'll start with moving of receipt of the report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? And then, if someone's willing, just maybe move the recommendations.
I'll move all the recommendations.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? I'm just going to make one comment, one and a half. Thank you so much for putting us in this format. I do appreciate that the demands on the growing community funds is shifting and may impact our ability to use them. So this is a reasonable approach to kind of make sure we have all the information to make decisions in the fall, as that information will be more clear. I will say, however, that I do feel strongly that a significant portion of the growing communities funds has to be used on amenities. If we're looking to increase population, we have to spend it on amenities that serve that population. And I think any expectation from the province that we're going to suddenly siphon all of this money over to fund staff to provide housing pieces, I don't think it's reasonable. I think at the province, if they're asking us to move those things forward, I still hope that they would consider looking at ways of providing some resources outside of the GCF to help fund some of those skill sets in house, because these other amenities are actually critically important for us to have a livable community once more people move in. So that's my only comments on this, but I'm super supportive of the resolutions that are in front of us here. Seeing no other comments, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Thank you. Moving to 10.4, we have short-term residential repairs cost estimates for 1538 Monterey. A big topic at hand, also open for public input. So if anybody from the public wishes to address council, this is the time to do it. Raise your hand inside the app. If you're watching the live stream on YouTube, this would be the time to come on, obviously the same thing, and either call in and hit *9 or come on to the thing. We will going through a presentation. We will be taking some questions. I'll go reach to the public. At that point, we're going to come back here and try and give some direction to staff on moving things forward. So with that, I believe we have Ms. Bay back here once again. It's a busy night for you. Perhaps just let you do an introduction.
Thank you, Your Worship. I hope you're not tired of me yet. This report, as mentioned, provides council with cost estimates for repairing 1538 Monterey Avenue for up to 3 years of residential use. The report also seeks council's directions on both immediate next steps with respect to how to get the information that you may be looking for, as well as on how to address the long-term future use of both this property, 1538 Monterey, as well as the district-owned property right across the alley from it, 1531 Hampshire Road, which is also owned by the district. But the focus of the report tonight is on 1538 Monterey from the point of view of the repair estimates that you've asked for. Repairing 1538 Monterey to a point where it can accommodate residential uses for up to the 2 to 3 year period. And that, I believe, just for the public's information, is really related to the timeline for the village area planning process. That was the rationale for the 2 to 3 years. As I understood it. So repairing 1538 Monterey to that point, where it could be used for 2 to 3 years, but not be used for any purpose thereafter, is anticipated to cost a minimum of $70,000 in addition to the $51,000 already spent. So I just want to talk for a moment about how that, why that estimate differs a little bit from the estimate that you received last time we came to you, and that was because it's lower now, because when we came forward last time around, we were anticipating that the residential repairs would be stage 1 of a process that would also ultimately see other uses. Like at that time, we were considering using the property for municipal office space, and then that some of the residential repairs would be undertaken with that in mind, that it would also have to eventually be used for a longer period of time for a more intensive use. So the repairs that are the subject of this estimate are really only designed to allow for short-term occupancy. And the flip side of that is, if it were to be leased out for that short-term period of 2 to 3 years, obviously then the tenants would be displaced after that 2 to 3 year period. If that in turn turned around to be a longer-term period, then additional monies would have to be spent to keep the property in the repair that it needs to be kept. So recovering even just the known upfront repair costs, so that $70,000 is the known upfront repair costs, would take approximately 9 years at nonprofit rental rates. That's assuming that we apply that at $1,100 a month, which is what it had been rented out to a nonprofit previously some years ago. And 3 years would be the recovery period if the rent was charged at $3,500 a month, just to give you kind of an order of magnitude of what that cost recovery period might look like. Given that the repairs cited would only allow for 2 to 3 years of use, renting at those nonprofit rates would obviously not support cost recovery. It'd take an additional 6 years of use, and that's a theoretical 6 years, of course, because if we were to actually provide for that additional 6 years of use, then the cost wouldn't be $70,000, it would be something more than $70,000. In reality, we know that the costs will likely be higher than just those $70,000 of repair costs, because that is just the repair cost. That doesn't include the full cost, which will likely include not just those known repair costs, but also the unanticipated costs that will come up. We just don't know which parts will fall apart and need to be replaced, nor how much they will cost. So, and once we have a tenant in there, obviously we have a responsibility to undertake those kind of emergency repairs that might come up. So the $70,000 does not include that. And then there will also be administrative overhead costs, the cost of our facilities manager overseeing the property, undertaking any repairs that come up. And then I think important also to acknowledge the potential project implications costs. Again, I hinted at it earlier on in the meeting about how Mr. Graham can only be stretched so far in terms of what he's able to take on, and he, as the facilities manager, would be the person responsible for overseeing that, and doesn't have excess capacity. So at this point, so that would likely impact. Once we take on that responsibility, that becomes an operational responsibility. That's part of the core work, and would likely delay the work, most likely on the Carnarvon Park building, because that's the one part that can kind of be moved because it's a project rather than an operational responsibility. So a number of costs there, and important to emphasize in addition to the pure $70,000 repair cost. So just hearkening back to what the recommendations of the staff report are, we're recommending that the report be received. We're also recommending that an options analysis be pursued as part of the village area plan process. You may recall council had some discussions about how to assess what the potential was on that particular property in terms of how much housing might it be able to accommodate, what other kind of district uses might the property be put to, and what would that look like. And previous direction from council had been to look at that options analysis as part of the village area planning process, and then things kind of started to shift around given the discussion for a period of time about the property being used for office space. And so we're just really recommending that be probably the most efficient way, at least from a staff perspective, of completing that work, recognizing that council may want that work sooner. So if you want that sooner, then it would not be done as part of the village area planning process, but council could direct us to do it earlier if that's council's desire. I will just note that the village area planning process is one of council's priority projects, and is obviously high on our list of priorities, but is also, of course, tied into the capacity constraints of our community building and planning department. And I'll also note that 1531 Hampshire is currently leased out to a tenant, so we do have a little bit of an ongoing responsibility there with respect to that property that is not immediately available anyhow. So that if we were to tie it to the village area planning process, that would line up nicely with the tenancy on that 1531 Hampshire. And then finally, the last recommendation is that council provide direction on whether 1538 Monterey Avenue should be repaired and leased for up to 3 years of residential use, or whether you want to do something or not direct us that way. I will say that if council doesn't want to pursue the short-term residential use, another potential alternative for council to look at may be the potential for accommodating community garden plots, and we really only just mentioned that in terms of there have been discussions about a community garden plot on that site in association with the Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Society community or Welcome House use. So there's just been a bit of previous discussion. There's of course many other potential uses that property could be put to. So in case there's questions, well, why comment on that particular one? And it's really just that past history of that having been something that the site used, but also recognizing that there is currently high demand for such plots. I believe our Park Services manager told me that there are over 100 people on the wait list for such. Again, would have the same kind of constraints associated with it as a potential residential lease, in that it would unlikely be to be a long-term use, and then at some point that use would be displaced. I will also note that unfortunately it would require a rezoning application because it's not a permitted use under the current zone. And then I'll just mention that we've got Mr. Graham here to answer any questions about the repair estimates, which he kindly put together. And we've also got Chris Hidley, the District's Park Services Manager, available online should there be any questions with regards to the community garden potential use.
Thank you. Councillor Green, then Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Ms. Bay, for a great report. I wasn't here for the last discussion. I was away on holidays, so I missed that conversation. So forgive me if I'm repeating things that were already mentioned. My question basically is, I'm looking at this property holistically, and so I guess I'm seeing that community gardens and residential use are not mutually exclusive, that they could be it could be a wonderful marriage, because there have been, concerns over the years about the state of the grounds around the house. So that sounds like a terrific solution. So I guess my question is it possible, through you to Ms. Bay, to look at, for instance, combining option 4 and 5, rather than looking at them as separate options? Would that be a possibility? And possibly option 1 as well. So those are sort of my questions. Is it possible to look at this creatively without changing the intent or the situation? I've always believed it should be used for housing, as you know. Thank you.
Ms. Bay, is it, obviously, no matter what, any use of this community plots will require a rezoning process, which takes a significant amount of time, but in terms of the underlying basic use, that rezoning could accommodate both residential use and garden plots. Is that correct?
Your Worship, the residential uses are already permitted, so that piece could proceed as soon as the repairs were completed, and it could proceed in advance of a potential community garden use of the site. And yes, the two could be run concurrently. Indeed, that was part of what we were thinking of proposing had there been staff use of the site. That was one of the things that was being explored as well, was the potential for the community garden use for the land portion of the site.
Councillor Green.
Secondary question, sorry, through you to Ms. Bay. Ms. Bay, is the Welcome House concept, is that a residential concept, or is that a gathering place for daily activities? Thank you.
Ms. Bay.
The previous tenant, an organization the nonprofit that managed it, called it the Welcome House. So I should perhaps not use that terminology, but it essentially was a group accommodation use of the site, where you had multiple unrelated people living with a caretaker on site. And I think that's what they branded as a package. They branded it a Welcome House, but essentially it's a residential use.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Smart, and then Braithwaite.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this detailed report. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question with regards to option 4 and the community garden use. Would the house stay as is on the property, or would that be assumed that it would be a demolition of that house to create a larger community garden? It just wasn't clear to me.
Ms. Bay.
Your Worship, the assumption here was that the house would stay and that the community gardens would be built in the garden area of the property.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
My question was similar to that. If it was, if that house was for residential use, say market value residential use, that lot is almost a double lot, I think. Would it be possible to have both, like at a market rental use instead of a nonprofit rental use, and the community gardens, and still have enough space for the market rental use to have a bit of a yard, I guess, is my question. And does that entail way too much work on having to get it subdivided or whatever?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. The property does have a bit of a front yard that wasn't intended to be used for community gardens in the sketches that I've seen done up by the Parks Department. So I guess it would be a matter of defining in the lease what part of the property it was that was being rented, and I don't know what the interactions might be there for a market rental with a community garden use in the background. We would also have to address obviously the parking that is associated with the community garden use and the traffic that potentially comes. Some people might walk to the site. Some people might be driving or bicycling to the site. So there's a number of those kind of considerations to bear in mind. Just building on the earlier comment, I mean, another direction council could would be to demolish the building and use the entire site for community gardens. So when I was commenting earlier on about what the assumption was, it was just based on the discussions that had happened to date. But council could really consider, of course, the full scope of options.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, really, my comment would be that I wouldn't want to have to incur the costs of the renovations to bring it up to be available as a rental. But I also wouldn't want to see that house ripped down in this time when we need rental properties. I mean, my preference would be for us to put the $70,000 in, rent it as a market rental, so that we can recoup those costs for our community, but hopefully at the same time have a portion of that lot be community gardens for the next 3 years or until our village plan is finished. I mean, that's kind of where I would go with it, I think. So, I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Councillor Watson. I'm just going to suggest here that I'm going to go to public input here in a moment. So if anybody from the public wishes to address us, this is the time to do it. If you've called in, you hit *9 to raise your hand. I might suggest that, the first couple, the report be received and that the options analysis be pursued as part of the village area plan. If there's general agreement there, we might spend some more time on how we're going to tease out the other portions of this, and we'll try and guide some of that conversation. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Bay or maybe Mr. Graham. It's just about the sort of sensitivity analysis of the $70,000 investment on the heels of already $51,000. And you had mentioned, Ms. Bay, that of course other things may come up that turns that that cost recovery into a much longer period of time if there are other things that have to be done while tenants were in place. So I know you can't maybe run this calculation on the fly, but if there was another $50,000 worth of work that came up that was required in order to establish a 3-year tenancy, in order to continue to make it livable as that a landlord would offer it, what does that do to the cost recovery period? Like, I'm trying to understand these possible housing options in relation to timing and future uses of the site under a longer-term planning process, and assess whether we would be, it's just good money after bad, or bad money after bad, or and whether we should actually just put it to one side while we do this other work and not do anything with it now, as long as as we move forward. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how we make that calculation.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And it tied into a question I was going to ask, which is, like, what happens, what are our options here of not putting any money into the house? Does the house deteriorate substantively, or what is the result of sort of, we're talking about $70,000 to bring it up to be rentable for short term. What happens if we don't invest money? I think it'd be an important question for us to have here. I'm not sure who that question. Much better than I should have asked that question. No, that's part of the same sort of continuum. So, Mr. Graham.
Through your worship, can I just get clarification on that? If we're doing nothing, there would be no occupancy of the building, correct? We'd likely have to do very little. For instance, the roof leaks this winter, we did some emergency patching. There was no leaks in the attic. It was dry. Even our testing equipment showed it was dry. The foundation that was showing water ingress, showing leaks, quite frankly, through hairline cracks. We've directed the gutters away from the house like anybody normally should, but and there was no water coming into the basement. So as it stands, it's doing well. The roof is past the end of its life. It could fail further. There's a lot of moss on it, but I think it would stand safely the way it is right now, short of a major earthquake.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Did that answer your questions as well? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to go to the public. If anybody online wishes to address us, this is your chance. I've called now twice to people to raise their hands. I haven't seen any hands popping up, so I'll leave the chance here. Okay, and so back to this room here. Again, to consolidate our discussion, I think the receipt and the sort of the process going forward are reasonably agreed to. Maybe not, but just I think that's it. So I think really we're down to, yeah, do we undertake repairs? If so, do we want a market or a nonprofit? Do we want to look at other use of the land in addition to residency at this time, and the conditions attached to that? So those are sort of the pieces. I might deal with receipt first, just because it's easy enough to deal with. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you.
I'll move that an options analysis be pursued as per
village area plan. Okay.
Written out.
Is that seconded? Seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on that portion? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
I will not be supporting this motion. I feel very strongly about option 2. I really think that looking at these sites while we have time this summer and are busy with other things is very key to informing our village area plan. I think that it's going to, especially the way staff have worded it now and taken out the troubling wording of best use and really focused it on, you know, the long-term community well-being. This is such a key time for us to get valuable information that's going to inform our village area plan.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just a clarifying question. So we're moving option 1 as a first option, and then we'll go on and consider others?
That's correct. So
Thank
the
you.
first portion of this is.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just a clarification, though, if we pass option 1, that we're not, then obviously option 2 would not be considered because it's one or the other.
The first part of the thing here is that one is we look at as we're looking at our options analysis for these two houses, we're doing it in the context of the village area plan. Option 2 changes that and prioritizes the options analysis for the houses on their own, and then would look at using those, I guess, to inform the village area plan. So I don't see any other hands on the motion here. Oh, sorry, Councillor Appleton's hand is up. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to support the motion for option number 1. My preference is for option number 2, to make some determination and gather some information about the possible use of the sites in as quickly as possible. So, not supporting option number 1. Rather see option number 2 advance. Thank you.
Thank you. If I might, option number 2, I might just ask this, Mr. Bowles is back in the room here. For my clarification, we have the village area plan process, which is a priority process. What happens with option number 2? Does that, if that's being asked to be done prior to the village area plan, does that affect the timeline of the village area planning process, if that's the intention to inform? Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Option 2 really talks about us bringing back, and because this isn't on our work plans right now, it would either need to be considered as a new project impact analysis or a project backgrounder. And just given where we're at in the year in terms of getting close to the fall anyhow, our recommendation here would be to direct staff to prepare a project backgrounder, or ask for council to ask staff to prepare a project backgrounder and bring back that back back in the fall for your consideration in terms of potentially initiating that at that point by providing the funding for it. We don't have funding allocated in our budget for it right now, and so I'll let invite Mr. Bowl to speak to how it would play into the village area timeline, but the option 2 would do it independently of the village area plan, and option 1 would do it as part of the village area plan. And it could potentially be a first phase of the village area plan process. It's not to say that it would necessarily have to wait until the conclusion of the village area planning process, but I'll invite Mr. Bowl to speak to that.
Mr. Bowl?
I'll take this one. Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yeah, this is something in terms of next steps. I would need to take a closer look at all some other projects that are in the pipeline, so to say, or queued up, so to say, particularly the village area plan. I'm cognizant of the fact that council had asked to start that project this year. So now we just had finalized the infill housing project sign off earlier this meeting. The next step would be to prepare that particular one, which will require some time. I think on this one, I need to think about if I can do that one as well, or do I move? I also have the greenhouse gas reduction program sitting in the queue, trying to finalize a couple of in-stream projects. So it would be helpful to, if council wants to go with this option, to also get an indication of where you see that in relation to those other pending projects. Thank you.
But for clarification, if option 1, that's moving it forward as part of it, option 2, we'll deal with if this fails, and then at that point it would go to an options analysis. We'll have some of those details come back with that, so we don't have to answer those questions tonight. I'm going to go to first-time speakers. I think. I still feel that this is the. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Patterson. I'll go to you first.
Thank you. You know, I understand the rationale for perhaps the desire for option 2, but I think it will be difficult to do an analysis, the options analysis, prior to a village plan, because it will be very difficult to determine the long-term community well-being without more of a feeling for what the village plan is going to be. I mean, it's pretty simple if we just look at the lots and say, okay, what's the best use of those lots, and it'll probably be how, you know, and so to do all the options analysis prior to a village plan, it doesn't seem to me that it will be as fulsome a discussion as if it was taken into consideration with the village plan. And I know it's kind of what comes first, you know, the cart or the horse. It is a bit difficult, but I feel that it has to be done in the context also of the village plan.
Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with what Councillor Patterson has just said. I think to take it out of sequence by giving it priority under 2 is actually confusing, because I see these 2 parcels of municipal-owned land really as part of the village for which we are about to prepare a master plan. So to try and take them out of context on their own and think that through doesn't make sense to me, and I would not be supporting option 2. I think in terms of all the work that's already been given to staff, how we expect and want to get going on the village plan, that it actually is counterproductive to try and accelerate a little piece of it, which will work better in context of the whole exercise. So I would not be supporting option 2.
Thank you. I don't think I've had Councillor Green. You've spoken yet on this, so no. Go ahead.
I'll be brief. I will support this option, and I agree that with Councillor Patterson, Councillor Watson, and Councillor Braithwaite, that we have always said that this would be part of a larger village plan. So this option 1 is consistent with what we've been saying, and I think to depart from that direction now would be it would be a mistake, I think, and I think Councillor Watson makes a good point. It would be confusing for the community. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to speak in support of the motion for option 1 that's on the table. All the reasons that were cited here. Also, I actually think it is the fastest way to see the land developed. I think that if we do this as part of a cohesive it speeds up. We only have so much bandwidth for public consultation. We only have so much bandwidth for those pieces. And frankly, I want all of the options on the table as we do our village area plans. We can be as creative and as sort of broad thinking as we can be, and that includes, that, to my mind, that means leaving these pieces of property as flexible as possible. And it's so for those reasons, I'm supporting option one. I did just want to, we're just running out of time here. I might just I think a procedural motion is in order here, perhaps for
Make a
half an hour.
motion to extend the meeting for a half an hour.
Mr. Seconder? All right. I'm just going to call the question for extension. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? Everybody's spoken once. Does anybody wish to speak for a second time on this matter? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just a question through you, Mayor, to staff. Could you clarify with option one what the sort of parameters are on sort of the soonest and the latest that we might see that options analysis? Some of the wording in the report gave me the sense that it might be a long ways off before the actual feasibility study on those lots might happen if we go with option one. I would just appreciate some more clarity on the timing.
Sir, Mr. Bowl, I know we haven't had your project thing for us to consider and approve and make our input on, but as much as you can answer, go ahead, please.
Through you, Mayor. For the project background, we're going to look again at all the different components of the project. It's quite a wide-ranging project with planning matters, but also public space and this particular item. And I think there's something else. But in short, we would be looking at what kind of elements can we do this year and get started with some of the. I think the bulk of the work will be at a later date, but at least our intent is to get back to you. Hopefully the next quarter 3, and then be able to get some work underway in quarter 4. And this could be one of the things that you have an opportunity when you see the project sign-off document to say, well, could that be first, or maybe we'll come back and recommend that we could do that first, or as one of the first items to start the whole village area plan project.
Smart.
Through you, Mayor, sorry, just to clarify, you called it a backgrounder, but you're talking about option one, options analysis?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor, is that corrected for that on that term? Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor right now. Any other hands popping up? Nope. I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor of option one and those opposed? Councillor Smart, Councillor Appleton, both opposed. That carries. We move then to the issues of whether this should be repaired and leased for up to 3 years of residential use. And then, of course, the other potential option is to look at instigating a rezoning process to also allow for some public gardens or some other ideas that council might have at this.
I'd like to move option 4.
So just short-term, directed to be used for short-term community use, garden use. Okay. Is there a second for that? Seconder for that? Go ahead, moved and seconded. I just think it's probably worth us having a conversation about both, although this is the motion on the floor, but I think the use, because market use and things would probably affect some of that, so I think just perhaps we can just take the motion as it is, that's fine, but just, I'll allow for conversation around both the type of rental, if any rental, what kind of rental, and community gardens all kind of together. But go ahead, Councillor Smart, you have the floor, and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, my main reason for putting forward this motion is that I can't justify what would be, I calculate $94,000 in financial loss with the non-market rental. And I really appreciate, I guess I'm looking at the impact of how many people can we impact with this solution. And I'm very concerned about the comments in the report about putting off the Carnarvon Park project due to the capacity for managing the residential rental. And I'm appreciative of the fact that the community garden use could impact many more residents. So from the perspective of impacting many residents due to the community gardening, and also many residents with keeping our Carnarvon Park project in schedule, and also saving potentially $94,000. Those are my 3 reasons for supporting option 4.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks. I totally hear what Councillor Smart is saying. I wonder, for clarification, if she is considering that the house would be then taken down, so that there was more room for community gardens.
But Councillor Smart better clarify.
I believe that the motion is to prepare a project backgrounder, so I imagine that staff would come back with that potentially as one of the options that we would all look at. It's not something I'm proposing.
Thank you. I mean, I have been a huge proponent of the community gardens since the beginning when we first got this property. So I'm very for the community gardens. I do though. I look at it a little bit differently, perhaps than Councillor Smart does, in that to me the $70,000 input of $70,000 to upgrade the house to be able to rent it at a market value rental would at least give at least one family the ability to have a place to live within our community. But I would like to see that happen along with the community gardens if possible. I understand that it would have to be rezoned for that. And if it's not possible, then so be it. We'll just go with the community gardens. But to me, it would be interesting to hear everybody else's comments around whether or not they feel that the house should be kept for in my opinion, a market value rental.
Councillor, and I'm encouraging that conversation to happen at this table. Go ahead, Councillor Watson, and then Green. So I had that order.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, just to comment on that, the options 4 and 5 together. I'll go to option. I would not support spending any more money on the house to rent it, whether at market rate or at below market rate, because I think there's still too much risk that further money would need to be spent on it, and it's a very short-term occupancy. So if you think in the scheme of things, so if you think about the small number of people in one dwelling that would actually benefit from that size of investment, I do not think it is a prudent investment. I am not against leaving the house as it is, just weatherproofed with its currently repaired roof, and animating that space with a community garden while we work towards the village area plan. I think that is a wonderful social activity and will allow many people to benefit. Well, depending on how many plots there are, but certainly it's an animating and social thing that does impact livability in the immediate vicinity and the center of our town. So I like 4. I do not support a short-term residential use of the term we're talking about for the kind of investment that's required.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
This is an interesting conversation. First of all, I support the idea of the garden plots, but I never perceived or conceived that the house wouldn't be there. So I see it as a marriage of two things, the garden plots and then a house that is used for, I would prefer nonprofit rental. I think that $3,500 a month, one of the huge issues in the housing crisis right now is unaffordable rent. And that's a lot of money. That's more than that could be 3 mortgages if one could afford to buy a house at this point. So I would like to see a nonprofit multi-family use of that house. I think it is worth the $70,000. I really do. It's not an investment. I'm not thinking of the house physically as much as I am socially. This is an investment, a social investment in the well-being of potentially either individuals or families. So I think this is an important social investment. And I would hope that we would work with a nonprofit. I believe we've made those connections with Hampshire. Hopefully those connections can be renewed for Monterey. So I will be pushing for below market rent and doing the repairs because, again, I don't see it as a house. I see it potentially as a home, a much needed home in a very important village, but in a place where we are trying to welcome people and provide housing for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Interesting conversation. There's no perfect solution here. I think I do concur with Councillor Braithwaite. I think that having it as housing in the shorter term is at least a positive thing to do. And I support the community garden, but I would like to see it go at a somewhat near market rental rate because it will provide housing, and potentially the people that are in that house for the shorter term can then transition into something perhaps maybe something else in the district. The social housing component of it, the not-for-profits, while it's certainly there's a community, I think, spirit of wanting to be giving and to these, but it can be quite difficult to work with the not-for-profits and find a suitable proponents to go in the building. And also, I think we have to keep in mind that sometimes the social housing aspect of it, the people that are going in those need to have a more sheltering private atmosphere. And so it's not always conducive to having the community garden around it. I see if it was more of a market rental rate that they would go in to the lease with the district with full knowledge that it's going to be also shared with the rest of the community they will get to know and love, hopefully, and it will work out for all parties involved. But I'm just not sure of doing the community garden with a not-for-profit venue because of the sheltering aspect that is often needed for that type of housing.
Just going to go to first-time speakers here before I go back around to second-time speakers. Interesting. I'm trying to distill this down. I think I'm hearing some consensus around at least getting the options back, what it would look like to do the community gardens. I think personally, I would like, we've gone down this path with nonprofits, I think 3 times now, trying to find partnerships that work. I guess the question I might have for staff on this one is are the nature of the repairs, a $70,000 estimate, are they the nature of repairs that could be done by way of organized volunteers through a nonprofit, i.e. some of the upgrades that had happened to the house in the past, painting, kitchen upgrades, those sorts of things? Or are these sort of more structural pieces that would require subject matter expertise to undertake?
Through your worship, it's kind of half and half. Some of them are as simple as like you say, painting, a few roof repairs, things like that. Ceiling repairs, not roof repairs. Others are some of the windows don't meet current egress requirements for bedrooms, so they would need to be replaced. There's a door onto a non-existent deck that would need to be framed in. There's a few things like that would need professionals, but a community group could do some painting, some flooring repairs, things like that, perhaps. It would be a tough thing to organize. I would just leave it at that.
I don't think we could organize that for sure. Okay, thanks for that answer. And I know the short time frame has always been the kiss of death for this one.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody struggles with putting time and energy into things on a short-term basis. So if I'm commenting probably more than asking questions at this point, I think I'm supportive of us looking at the community garden use. I would be curious about what the real market rental would be possible. I'd rather see it used. If that market rental is viable with the garden space, I'd be supportive just because housing is housing and it's helpful. But I'm I have to say, swayed in many ways by the arguments of Councillor Watson on this one. It feels like we've put a lot of money and time into this project. That is, I think realistically its best use is not a single family house. And so spending money, $70,000 even on this short term, is $70,000 we don't have to pay for a project lead to go and develop a larger project for the space. So I'm struggling with any money going into this building at this point. I will say that. So I might take. So we have a motion on the floor right now, which is for the staff being directed to provide a project backgrounder for community garden use. So I think that's on the floor right now. We can maybe deal with that one.
Could we just perhaps see if the mover and the seconder are amenable to asking staff just to maybe put something in the report in regards to what it might look like to have that house as a market rental? Just because I mean, it might be that it comes back and we go, you know what, no, let's just keep it as community garden.
So procedurally, I'm going to deal with the motion for the community gardens. and we'll leave that. And then if there's a motion coming up on the use of the building, I'll deal with that a little bit separately, because they're somewhat independent. I think we can manage in that way. And that would, conflate two different issues, that people support one and not the other. 'Cause I think the housing use is the more contentious of the two things. So we have a motion right now for the community gardens. Is there any other discussion on the community gardens? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I just really quickly want to add something about community gardens and therapeutic benefits. And yes, nonprofit groups often deal with marginalized individuals, but in my former career as a probation and parole officer and working with the correctional center, Vancouver Island Correctional Center, there was early on in the 1970s a working farm on site. And all of the offenders that were in custody worked on that farm, and the therapeutic benefits and effects of that were amazing. So all I'm saying is, if there are people with some challenges or struggles, it could be an incredibly beneficial experience. And combining with owners and not owners, residents who also work in gardens. I mean, it has therapeutic benefit. That's just all I want to say, and I'll stop now.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Motion is on the floor. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I'm so sorry. I feel terrible having to vote against this, but I'm going to have to vote against it. But I really want the community gardens there. So hopefully it'll. I don't know. I'm just very. It's a very hard decision to make, and I don't want to be seen as voting against community gardens, but I will have to vote against the motion as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Councillor Smart. I do want to get to a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly have staff clarify. My understanding is that if option 4 proceeds, that it doesn't mean that option 5 can't. It's an and/or. So it's just actually looking at the option more closely for community garden use. Am I correct?
Staff. Ms. Bay? Oh, Ms. Williams? The answer is yes.
Yes, that is correct. It is and/or for these two.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna speak in favor of the motion. I think we should have the options analysis come back on it. I do recognize, though, community gardens for 3 years are gonna have exactly, and they're not gonna be appreciated to have them taken out in 3 years either. So it's gonna create an expectation and an enjoyment that being said, I think we're looking at a much higher use for that space in the future. So I think it'll be better justified. So anyway, I think the options analysis is supportable at this point. Any other discussion before we go on?
Sorry,
Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and thank you for saying that, and thank you for asking the question about option 5. So I will support community gardens going forward, but I would like to see, I'm going to be putting another option on the table as well afterwards.
Okay, I'm just dealing with the community gardens at this point. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Watson.
I would just like to add that with respect to the community garden, the kind of investment to enliven the space is much smaller. We're talking about soil, fertilizer, volunteer time, some water. And whether that lasts for 3 years or 4 years, I think that's probably time and money that the community would still be happy to spend, as opposed to a much larger amount for housing.
I can totally foresee that we're going to take 12 months to do a rezoning. And by that time, we'll have a decision made on the land, and we'll never get around to this anyway. But anyway, we'll just see how that plays out. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. There's community gardens and there's community gardens. Now, what I am envisioning when we're talking about these, because of the location and the complaints that we have had about the condition of the property for the last several years, my view of a community garden in this location is not like the community gardens that are down opposite Firefighters Park, which are very basic and have large stock of composting manure and bark chips and whatnot, but we don't have. So I'm envisioning one with nicer boxes, fencing all around for the deer, and so that there would be more cost to that, albeit not as expensive probably as the home renovations, but hopefully that is what we are talking about when we're talking about this.
Again, project backgrounder will be laid out in that, so I just want to make sure we're staying on task here. So we have a motion on the floor here to move forward with. Nobody's disagreeing with this. I'm going to call the question. Option 4, short-term community garden use, project backgrounder. That's what the motion is. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? See no hands opposed. That carries.
I would like to move option 5.
Moved and seconded. So this is to direct staff to complete repairs to allow for 2 to 3 year residential use of 1538 Monterey Avenue. Okay. Thank you. We've had a good conversation, but there's nuance here, obviously, in that this is not specific to market or nonprofit. I'll just say that. So this presumes that we will find a tenant one way or the other. To be determined, I guess, is the logic here. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I won't be supporting this motion. I mean, I would rather see us write a check for $70,000 and give it to the ICA or another great organization.
I think that was my argument last time.
All right, let's keep the order of speaking orders in here. We have a motion on the floor to direct the repairs. Any other discussion on this? We have mover and seconder. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, as much as it pains me to say so, I can't support this at this time. I think that we have made a concerted effort to try to use the house for housing, and it bothers me very deeply to have a residence unavailable for housing when housing is so desperately needed. But the effect on the overall housing need compared to the investment for very short-term gain on behalf of the district is quite, there's quite significant investment needed just to get us that far. So as much as it bothers me to say so, I think I tend to agree with Councillor Smart in the sense that there could be investments made to support housing in a different way, and not have the investment in infrastructure in the home to keep it going for another 2 to 3 years essentially go to waste if that house isn't retained. So as much as it bothers me to say so, I won't support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly appreciate the comments by Councillor Watson and Councillor Appleton. I know where they're coming from, and Councillor Smart. However, if the building is staying in place and not being demolished, then I think it would be a better use to have it made habitable and seek market rents for it. Now, because I think otherwise it would mean another option here, and that would be moving immediately to demolition of the house.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Through you, Mayor, I just wondered if we could get a clarification from staff on how many months or I hope it's not years that the Carnarvon Park building would be delayed due to the managing of the rental. And just also a clarification on, my understanding is the building wouldn't have to be demoed.
Staff, I know there's a 4-month time frame for the work to be done. Does that correlate to a potential delay on Carnarvon?
Through your worship, it's part of it is also managing the project, even if we were to have a third-party residential contractor managing the rental component. It's time, risk if things go wrong and repairs, things like that. So it's a bit of a fuzzy answer, but yes, there's certainly going to be 3 or 4 months just to get it ready. I would go out of my way to never demolish a home. I would try and find somebody that would be willing to take it and move it to a new site or something like that, or at very least deconstruct it. So for the community gardens, we would obviously get more plots. I've done some sketches of my own, and with 5 parking stalls, we get approximately 26 plots, little garden plots. I've worked with Parks and Chris on that. Mr. Hidley. With the house staying, if the house were to be removed, we could potentially get almost double that. So there's options for and against keeping the house, certainly if it's empty. The Carnarvon project, trying to find the time to get further, move that forward. We've had several meetings and just it's stalling out just because of quite frankly my time to be able to get onto some of the other things. So it's hard to place how much time this will take.
Thank you. Any other discussion? These are the worst, I have to say, the series of bad options, that nothing gives you good pieces on it. I think where I'm ending up to fall on this one is probably to not undertake repairs on it. I think the general direction of the council seems to be to look for different use of that lot, whatever that looks like. And I don't see, even with market rents, by the time we've finished the renovations and in the timelines that I'm hoping that we get our village area planning done and other options in place, we're not going to make that money back again. And I am a little bit afraid of the cascading cost realities of things right now. So I'm struggling with this one, but I'm not sure I'm going to support the option 5 as it's laid out in front of us. If there's any other comments? No. So the motion on the floor is to direct staff to complete repairs for a short-term use. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Appleton, Councillor Watson, Councillor Smart, and Mayor Murdoch opposed. So that fails. That means that there is won't be work undertaken on that building for now, and we'll have some options back on the things. That's where we're sitting at right now. I think that covers off our options on the floor. It's not a decision or piece that I feel comfortable with, but I think it's probably may well be the right one. Unless there's anything else arising, we've dealt with 11.1. We're moving to 11 to 12, section 12, which is bylaws and permits. Boy, it's going to be tough to get through this all, but I'm going to try. So is there any public input requested on items number 12.1 or 12.2? This is the sewer requisition impact or the beekeeping. I'll take, you can raise your hand right now and I'll make sure I go to the public before I get to any motions on these, and I'll certainly call again for the second 12.2. So we have sewer requisition impact. Mr. Payne, I know you're online with us. The report is fairly clear in terms of what the reasons that we're here. Perhaps you can provide a quick overview.
Yes, Your Worship. Some brief background here. The core area liquid waste treatment plant was recently constructed, and once constructed, the district was subject to the operating costs of that liquid waste treatment plant. Those operating costs are allocated based on sewer flows. Council opted to fund this with a sewer fee that's based on water consumption. So annually, the district adjusts its rate to be effective for the next year. So we adjust the rate around November, December to be effective for the next year. So to calculate that rate, the district, we used preliminary budget figures from the CRD. Our fall budget estimates were $2.5 million, but when we were provided with the actuals were around $2.9 million. So that's resulting in a forecasted budget shortfall or actual shortfall for 2023. The reasons for the budget differences were twofold. One reason was that there's historical rainfall during the period in question, and when we get rainfall, the upland sewer combined sewer area is disproportionately impacted by that rainfall as it flows into our sanitary sewer system and is metered as well. And then as well, the CRD built some new sewer infrastructure downstream, which allowed them to pump further capacity. Previously, much of that would result in an outfall, which was not metered. So the new CRD infrastructure essentially provided the ability for them to pump more metered flow. So some of the impacts that increase the budget for 2023 are permanent. So the new infrastructure capacity is permanent. Some of it not so permanent, being the historical rainfall. So the district, so staff have put together a couple options for council consideration, and the recommended option is to increase the CRD sewer user fees effective July by about 15%. That would be an additional $25 this year to the average utility ratepayer. And then that still may result in a deficit this year. However, that a fee would be annualized, the most appropriate fee at this time. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I appreciated the additional comments in the report talking about additional conversations happening with the CRD to try to address this. We have a minute and a half left, and we do have some bylaws that we need to get through here, I think. So
I'll
perhaps we
make
can
a
extend
motion
by 15 minutes.
to extend the meeting by 15 minutes.
Is there a seconder? Moving second. This has to be unanimous for it to continue. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We are continuing, but let's move through this at a pretty expedient pace. Are there any questions of Mr. Payne on this one? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Mr. Payne, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Payne, it talks in your report, I think on page 2, under what can be done to avoid future budget surprises, it says the district's proportion is greatly influenced by flows in other municipalities, which the district won't be able to analyze in advance. Is there going to ever be a way that we are going to be able to analyze that in advance? Because it seems like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place to not know in advance what these costs are going to be.
Mr. Payne?
Through Your Worship, no, there will be no perfect answer to that. The district staff proposed that the sewer flow proportion be based on prior years, and every year it's sort of 1 year behind, so we would have some certainty. And the CRD staff informally agreed to average the flow, so that reduces the volatility over several years. Furthermore, we are analyzing future CRD infrastructure impact more proactively now to help manage those expectations. But really, in the long term, we expect our proportion to drop as the upland sewer separation project unfolds, because that would take a significant flow from roadway flow of rainwater that ends up in our combined system out of the flow calculation.
Thank you for that. Councillor Appleton, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just picking up on that, I guess to the extent that it's possible, I would really like to see that conversation with the CRD continue, because I know clearly there's no deliberate intent to surprise us with numbers, but certainly, having a significant revision that produces, a significant adjustment to taxes after the budgeting process is, I think, a little off-putting for everybody involved. So the extent to which that we can get some better certainty, or that this potential for the averaging over a number of years to try and implement that, I think our citizens would appreciate it. And I was a little bit taken aback, to be honest, to see a significant revision of that, that magnitude happen at this stage of the game. So anything that can be done to address that, I would certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Appleton. I appreciate the staff for having that conversation, but it is possible for it to be raised at the CRD table as well if there's no resolution found that's satisfactory, because this has never happened in our history before, but it's obviously not impossible for happen to any of the members. Okay, I don't see members of the public indicating they wish to speak. Not too surprising.
Move receipt.
So we move through these fairly quickly. Move receipt. Is there a seconder? Is there a seconder for receipt? Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed.
I'll move that the sewer charge bylaw number 4392, amendment bylaw number 4843, 2023 be read for the first and second time.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Any debate or discussion on this matter? We have the debate at second reading, so make sure people have a chance. Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed.
And I'll move that the sewer user charge bylaw number 4392, amendment bylaw number 4843, 2023 be read a third time.
And seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That'll come back for adoption at the next meeting. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just for clarification, with the options at the bottom of that report, do we also need to move option 2 recommended, or was that assumed under the earlier motion?
No, I think that is included in this, yeah, it's built into the bylaw changes that were put forward here. I'm just going to confirm that though with staff. Mr. Payne, that is correct, is it not?
Your worship, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on then to item 12.2, beekeeping opportunities in commercial zoned areas. We don't have Mr. Green here, so I'm assuming Mr. Bull is here in his place. He took a good time to take a week off, I gotta say.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Looking forward to his
Councillor
return.
Smart?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A short introduction. This follows up on previous discussions in May, where Council directed to prepare a zoning bylaw amendment to make changes to allow for beekeeping in commercially zoned areas for consideration of readings and adoptions. There was also a motion at the same time to look at policy options to permit beehives on rooftops. And in the proposed bylaws, there's two of them. The one is the zoning bylaw. The other one, the animal control bylaw. We're focusing on the changes for commercial institutional zones. So the zoning bylaw expands the allowed zone, so to say, for beekeeping to include commercial and institutional uses. And also changes for 1810, which is an existing provision about residential situations for beekeeping. The current language is quite complex, but boils down, we believe, to must be located in the rear yard. So we kept that as is. And in the animal control bylaw, we simplified the language there as well. There was quite a bit of language there that was overlapping with the zoning bylaw. But right now the amendment simply will state that the parcel for beekeeping should be zoned for beekeeping and leave it at that. So those are the proposed changes in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart, then Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, just a few questions for staff. So one of them was, I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit more, if possible, on the logic of locating beehives in residential backyards. I have had my house looked at for the potential of having a beehive, and they were recommending the roof is the best location. And looking at, I have a neighbor who has a heat pump on their roof that is noisy and unattractive. Why can we not allow for a beehive on a residential roof?
Mr. Bull, I don't think that was originally part of the discussion, but if you can answer the question.
Through you, Mayor, the request originated from a request to deal with commercial settings. So I think that's where we focused on this particular bylaw drafting to fix that. It's meant to be fairly compact. We did have a discussion among staff about should we further clarify it or change the provisions for single family. We decided not to touch that beyond simplification. But it wouldn't, in terms of text, it wouldn't be a big change, but it would be a change in the residential area, and we weren't quite sure if that was a different matter that would need to be considered further. But there's definitely options similarly to what we do for the commercial institutional zones. We could treat the residential areas the same, but currently that's not in the bylaws. But if council wishes so, that could be changed or updated, but it would require a bit of editing of the bylaw, either today or at a separate follow-up meeting.
I think I would suggest we don't wordsmith bylaws on the fly, but we could certainly we could send it back for changes if that was a request, or we could do a motion arising or a future notice of motion to address those changes as well, if that was the desire of council. Councillor Smart, continue, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll leave that for now for other people to comment, but if there's not really a reason to not have them on roofs of residential houses, I just point out there's no reason to that we should be preventing that. My other question was, can we look at the terminology in the bylaw of one-family residential to be future-proofed in light of the infill housing project? I worry that with the term one-family residential, that's quickly going to prohibit most properties from having beehives on their property when we allow for multiple dwellings on a property.
Mr. Bull, is there a
through you, Mayor. I appreciate the suggestion. that wording is in newer bylaws a bit different. There are a lot of references, though, in the zoning bylaw that are currently in existence, and there's also similar language in some other bylaws. I was doing a quick scan, and I noticed the parking facilities bylaw and the building bylaw also have some references, not as many as in the zoning bylaw, obviously. So it would be a bit of a fairly involved housekeeping matter that could be done later. I think with the info housing program, there may be an opportunity there to look into the naming of the different land uses. Or there's also a council priority project that's pending for future consideration later this year, the zoning bylaw update itself. Probably would be best suited there to look at those kind of naming conventions. There may be other matters that have outdated names by now. So that would be our recommendation as staff to leave that for later. But it's definitely a valid point. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just one last question to staff, just with regards to procedures, and when a delegation comes and speaks to us and then we follow up with bylaw revisions such as this, is it really the nature for council to reach out to that delegation and inform them that this is actually moving ahead, or is that something that staff does? I was just curious procedurally what the best practice would be and what council's involvement is in that, just to ensure that those who come to the table and have something dealt with many months later are kept in the loop of the work that is happening.
Coates, you're reaching for a button.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would say to the question that it's not something that happens with great frequency, and so because of that, I think it would be fairly straightforward to follow up with that delegation to say that the conclusions were reached, and here's the outcome. So as a matter of course, yes.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the matter? I'm going to give a final call to public if anybody wishes to address us, but we've got a very small online contingent at this point, so I'm not expecting any other public comments.
I'm going to move receipt.
Moved receipt. Any discussion? Seconded, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries.
I'll move that council give first and second reading to zoning amendment bylaw number 4839/2023.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Any discussion?
I'll just say just one thing. I know that for the delegation, because it was the Oak Bay Beach Hotel that came forward, I'm quite sure that Councillor Green, as the tourism liaison, will probably talk to them about that as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think it's been an interesting one. I remember when this first came to council many years ago, and there was a lot of consternation and discussion about it. And it's always interesting once they're established in how people get used to them and have that. In fact, our neighbors brought over a nice jar of honey the other day because we have a lot of nice flowers in our front yard, and they figured that we'd probably help feed their bees. So that was lovely. All right, that's a little off topic, and we have short of time. All those in favor of first and second reading? Any opposed? None opposed? Go ahead.
I'll move that council give third reading to zoning amendment bylaw number 4839/2023.
And seconded. Can I get a hand for seconding? Thank you. Any discussion? No discussion of third reading. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? That carries.
I'll move that council give first and second reading to animal control amendment bylaw number 4840/2023.
Seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? That carries.
And I'll move that council give third reading to animal control amendment bylaw number 4840/2023.
Seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? That carries. That will come back for adoption in next meeting. Any new business? the facial expressions, if you can't see them online, are cringing with pain at the idea. We move now to adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? Thank you, Councillor Appleton, for joining us online for a long meeting. And we look forward to seeing you in person. Sorry, what was that, Councillor Green?
Have you seen the cartoon that says, "We'll be right, worldwide"?
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for those attending online. And we'll see you all back here in short order in July.